Chapter 1385. Arching City. 3 days later, when Kaghan Hulahan was still waiting for good news from General Akmu, an unexpected piece of news was delivered to him. When the cavalry who had escaped from the front lines knelt down in front of him and described the situation at the front lines, Hulahan felt the sky darken, and he almost fainted. Akmu had actually been defeated. Not only that, but his own life and death were unknown. Of the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry under him, less than 400 had returned. This result was completely out of Hulahan's expectations. Since the 5-star army only had 10,000 people, even if they could not win, they should be able to retreat safely. They were the Mongolian cavalry, a race that had grown up on horseback. Compared to the Hans who were not good at riding, they had a natural advantage. In fact, many times on the battlefield, they looked down on their Hans opponents. Hulahan fainted. His subordinates tried to save him, pinching his philtrum and splashing cold water on him, before finally waking him up. After waking up, Hulahan first accepted the fact that they had lost, but he still did not believe that Akmu would be fine. He was very clear about Akmu's abilities, and ordinary people would not be able to catch him. Furthermore, he had a large army, so he believed that he would definitely be able to break out of the encirclement. Just as Hulahan regained his composure, Belinsky walked in from outside the door. He first bowed to Hulahan and then asked with concern, "I heard that the Great Khan is not feeling well. I have already found the best doctor in the city. They are waiting outside the residence and can examine the Great Khan at any time." "No need, this Khan's body is very good." Hulahan waved his hand. He did not trust the Han's doctors, not to mention that he was not sick. He had only fainted because he was too anxious. However, no matter what, Belinsky had good intentions. This time, they were able to take down Arching City because of him. A look of hesitation flashed across Hulahan's face, but he quickly said with determination, "Let me tell you something. General Akmu fell into the Han's trap and lost the battle." "What?" Belinsky's expression changed when he heard this. He was indeed unaware of this news. After all, news of Akmu's death had only just reached the city. This news caused Belinsky's expression to change drastically. At the same time he asked suspiciously, "Great Khan, is this true? Was this news personally sent by General Akmu? But where is the general now?" "The news didn't come from Akmu. It came from the cavalry he brought with him. Don't worry, this news is reliable. The battle is definitely won. As for Akmu's whereabouts, even I don't know." While shaking his head, Hulahan angrily slammed the table and said, "The 5-star army has gone too far. They actually dared to set a trap for me. They are truly despicable. This enmity must be avenged." Hulahan did have a reason to be angry. No one would be in a good mood after being taught a lesson by someone they had always looked down on. But why didn't he think about it? If he hadn't targeted the Far Eastern Army first, how could the 5-star army find trouble with them so quickly? Hulahan was still sulking. Belinsky indeed wouldn't. Although he was a merchant, it was because of this that he placed benefits and safety more than anyone else. The Mongol cavalry was known as a race on horseback. They had always been the ones to kill. When had they ever been killed or lost a battle? At the very least, from what he knew, when the Russian tribes faced the Mongol cavalry, they had mostly lost. The 5-star army was actually so powerful that they could defeat the elite Mongol cavalry. Didn't that mean they were even more powerful? He had actually offended such a powerful person. Didn't that mean he was no longer safe? "No, I have to leave. I have to leave the 5-star army." In this chaotic world, Belinsky, who had always viewed his life as the most important, quickly made a decision. In order to leave this place safely, he had to ask Hulahan to bring him along. Otherwise, whether it was in the Far East or in the Siberian region, he would not have a foothold in the future. Belinsky, who had made up his mind, looked at Hulahan and organized his words before saying, "Great Khan, the 5-star army is so powerful. We shouldn't fight them head-on." What? Do you really think this Khan is afraid of them? This time, they only defeated Akmu because they schemed. Even if they can win, they must have suffered heavy losses. Now this Khan still has more than 15,000 elite cavalry. This Khan is still confident that we can defeat them. Hulahan wouldn't admit defeat so easily. Although his bloodline wasn't pure, and he couldn't be considered a member of the Golden family, he was still a descendant of Genghis Khan. He was still very proud in his bones. Seeing that Houlihan was still so stubborn, Belinsky scolded him for being stupid in his heart. On the surface, he had to put on a serious expression and said, "The Great Khan's might is naturally not something that the Han people can match. However, the problem now is that not only do we have the Five-Star Army as our enemy, we also have the Far Eastern Army behind us. Previously, we were unprepared and caught them off guard, so they had no choice but to hide. However, now that their reinforcements are here, they will definitely jump out and become enemies with the Great Khan. When that time comes, the Great Khan won't have any advantage in terms of military strength. Even if we can win in the end, the Great Khan's strength will also be heavily injured. In that case, if other forces enter this place, what will we use to defend against them?" This. Houlihan wanted to say that as long as he was here, they wouldn't be defeated by the Five-Star Army. However, after considering that if they really won an Pyrrhic victory, once their strength was severely damaged, it was inevitable that there would be despicable people who would target them. There were no laws here, nor was there any so-called justice. Everything was based on the law of the jungle, where the strong preyed on the weak. If they didn't have enough strength, then they deserved to be bullied. Houlihan wouldn't watch his strength be damaged and be looked down upon by others. If that was the case, what was the use of occupying Archang? Thinking of this, his thoughts of fighting to the death with the Five-Star Army couldn't help but waver. Seeing that Houlihan didn't say anything, Belinsky knew that his suggestion was effective. He immediately followed up. "Great Khan, the Han people have a saying, where there is life, there is hope. As long as the Great Khan is still here, this one is still here. If you and I work together, I will provide the money and you will provide the manpower." The Han people also have a saying, "It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge." Today the Five-Star Army made us suffer. Let's remember this first. We will get our revenge sooner or later. As Belinsky consoled him, he also repeated his own importance. In the end, he was telling Houlihan that he was very important, and that he had to bring him along when he left. Houlihan, who didn't think too much, didn't know what Belinsky was thinking. He was only considering whether Belinsky's words were correct. Just like how Belinsky valued his own life, Belinsky naturally didn't want to die. Not only that, he also valued his own strength. Since he was young, he had seen too many unfair things. He also respected the truth, which was that the one with the biggest fist was the absolute truth. As long as you had enough strength, you could set the rules. On the other hand, if you were weak, even if what you said was correct, no one would listen to you. He thought about how he wasn't the only armed force in Siberia, and he wasn't even the only Great Khan. If his strength was weakened too much, he was afraid that he wouldn't even have a place to stay when he returned this time. Since he wasn't confident that he could win, and there wouldn't be enough benefits even if he won, why would he fight this battle? Instead of taking the risk, it was better to retreat first. Just like what Belinsky said, he should preserve his strength first. Revenge could wait until he was stronger, right? Okay. After thinking it through, Houlihan slapped his thigh and said, "You're right, we don't have to fight to the death with the Five-Star Army. Since that's the case, why don't we retreat first? How about this? This Khan will immediately order the army to prepare to leave. When the time comes, we won't leave anything behind for the Five-Star Army. This Khan wants to leave them a mess and give them a headache." Belinsky heaved a sigh of relief when Houlihan finally thought it through. However, when he heard that Houlihan wanted to openly retreat, he stopped him and said, "Great Khan, you can't do that. If we leave now, we will definitely leak the news. What if the Five-Star Army and the Far Eastern Army join forces and chase after us? What do you think we should do?" Arhan didn't think about this problem, and was a bit stunned when he was asked this. If we leave, then we leave. In the past, when we retreated from a place, it was always like this. With a big order, the army would move out and grab everything that they could see and use. Why did they have to do something so complicated this time? Arhan was confused, so Belinsky knew that he had to explain some things to him. "Great Khan, the current situation is like this. We just lost to the Five-Star Army. Once the news leaks out, the morale of the army will definitely fall. If the hidden Far Eastern Army also knows about this, they will take advantage of the situation and come out. What can we do? If they join forces with the 5-star army and attack us from two sides, even if we can leave, we will have to pay a price. Even if we leave, we can only leave quietly. Before we leave, we can also remove some unstable factors in the army. Unstable factors. Houlihan didn't understand what the other party was talking about. Chapter 1386. Belinci sighed in his heart. This Houlihan might be good at fighting and killing, but when it came to scheming and plotting, he was a far cry from that. It was probably because there was no one else in the Mongolian army that he was able to get the position. Great Khan Tang Sheng is a surrendered general, but he has not truly joined us. Before, it was only because we captured his tribesmen and forced him to join us. Now that he's with his clansmen, no one knows if he'll really listen to us. People like him are unstable elements in the army. Since that's the case, why don't we leave him here and let him lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern Army? Isn't that killing two birds with one stone? After he leaves, our army will leave the city. At that time, it will be the Han people's problem. If they want to kill each other, we can just kill them. There will be no losses for us. What do you think, Great Khan? After finally speaking his thoughts, Belinci looked into Houlihan's eyes with anticipation. HM? That makes sense. Houlihan took a while to digest these words, then nodded his head heavily. He was a selfish person and would not easily trust others. In his eyes, the remaining 15,000 Mongol cavalry were the most loyal. Even Belinci could be abandoned at any time, let alone Tang Sheng. If it was not for the fact that Tang Sheng still held the authority of the 2nd Cavalry Division, he would not even look at him. Now that he could leave safely by abandoning Tang Sheng, it was definitely worth it. He nodded and said, "That's fine. I'll leave this matter to you. The sooner the better." Yes. Belinci nodded heavily. Although he was not willing to do such a thing, if he left it to Houlihan, it could easily cause problems. For his own safety and the safety of his assets, he had to do it personally. After leaving the Great Khan's residence, Belinci went straight to Tang Sheng's residence. Ever since his clansmen had been found and sent to All City, Tang Sheng had arranged for them to stay in his courtyard. Along with some of his personal guards, although the courtyard was not big, there were quite a few people. There were close to 500 people. When Belinci arrived, he felt that it was very lively. When Belinci arrived, Tang Sheng, who had received the news, immediately came to welcome him. The two of them went to the study and asked everyone to leave. When Tang Sheng saw Belinci's cautious expression, he had a bad feeling. Until the other party spoke, he knew that his premonition was not wrong. "General Tang, a great disaster is about to befall you," Belinci said with a long sigh, as if he was very concerned about Tang Sheng. "Why?" Tang Sheng was so shocked that he stood up from his chair with a look of horror on his face. Ever since he rebelled against the Far Eastern Army, Tang Sheng hadn't had a good night's sleep. As a traitor, especially before his old master was killed, he needed to be on guard against revenge and all kinds of methods that could be used against him. Especially in the past few days, the entire All City had been in chaos. The people living here, whether it was their personal safety or their property, were greatly threatened. Facing the Mongol cavalry who only knew how to plunder and didn't know how to manage and produce, the people were already complaining and dissatisfied. Sometimes, even he would feel angry when he saw the Mongol cavalry's actions. They were simply a group of bandits who didn't talk reason, and only did things based on their emotions. They didn't care about the people's feelings at all. However, because they had cavalry swords in their hands that could kill, the people didn't dare to say anything. Because of this, many people vented their anger on him. Even though he also held a certain amount of military power, the people weren't bold enough to attack his residence, and no one dared to truly make a move against him. However, when he walked on the streets, he could still feel the unconcealed anger of the people when they looked at him with gazes. He had offended the Far Eastern Army, offended the people in the city, and the 5-star army had sent reinforcements. It would be strange if Tang Sheng was in a good mood. As a result, there were many times when he began to doubt whether his actions back then were right or wrong. For the sake of his less than 200 clansmen, he had betrayed the interests of tens of thousands of Far East soldiers and hundreds of thousands of people. Did he do something wrong? While he was reflecting on himself, Tang Xing was also very afraid of death. He was afraid that some people who couldn't touch the Mongol cavalry would target him. Therefore, when he went out, he doubled the number of guards. Even when he slept at home, he arranged many guards outside to protect him. However, even so, he was still unable to sleep until dawn. Often, the slightest movement would wake him up. Now that Belinsky had come and said that he was in trouble, how could he not be afraid? Mr. Tang, what's going on? Back then, I listened to you and rebelled against the Far Eastern army. Now you can't leave me alone. Tang Xing suddenly grabbed Belinsky's arm and said with a pleading expression, "Don't be agitated, don't be agitated." Belinsky was in a good mood. Originally, he thought that it would take some effort to scare Tang Xing. But now, it seemed that he was simply a bird that was startled by the twang of a bow. So the following things would be much easier. After patting Tang Xing's arm and making a comforting gesture, Belinsky frowned. After thinking for a while, he said to Tang Xing, who was listening seriously, "General Tang, I'm sure you can tell that the Khan is a suspicious person. He doesn't really trust you, right?" "Yes." Tang Xing nodded. Half of his blood was Han Chinese. Just based on this, it would be extremely difficult to make Hulahan trust him. "Yes, the Khan is somewhat suspicious of you. Previously, someone went to the Khan and complained to him, saying that you only surrendered to the Khan on the surface, but secretly had other thoughts and that you were still in contact with the Far Eastern army." "No, absolutely not." Tang Xing, who had just sat down, suddenly stood up again with a thump. His face was red. This time he was really anxious. The feeling of being wronged was not good. He would never admit to something he did not do. "Don't worry, your subordinate will speak, your subordinate will speak." Belinsky comforted him again, then said, "I absolutely trust the general. You have already stabbed the Far Eastern army. How could you still be in contact with them? I also went to the Khan about this matter and told him that you are innocent." Thank you, thank you." Tang Xing wiped the sweat on his forehead and said gratefully, "Don't thank me. In fact, this matter is not over. I only temporarily dispelled the Khan's suspicion of you. If you want the Khan to completely believe you, you still need to do something." Belinsky began to lead the topic to the trap. Sure enough, when he heard that there was a solution, Tang Xing asked with a face full of curiosity, "Please teach me, Mr. Tang." "I can't say that I'll teach you, but if the general can lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern army, wouldn't that be the best way to prove yourself? At that time, once you can capture the Far Eastern army's commander, or even severely injure the Far Eastern army, who would dare to doubt you? At that time, not only will the Khan completely trust you, it is also possible that he will give you great power." When he heard that he had to become enemies with the Far Eastern army, Tang Xing's face immediately turned ugly. When Belinsky instigated him to rebel, he said that it would be best if he could capture Chenbo. If he couldn't, he only needed to open the gates of Archung. In the future, he wouldn't need to do anything to deal with the Far Eastern army. But now it was a different story. Tang Xing wanted to remind the other party of the promise he made to him. But after thinking about it, what was the point of saying it? Right now, Hulahan didn't trust him. If he didn't quickly solve this problem, who knew when the Mongolian cavalry would visit his home? If that happened, would he and his clansmen still have a way to live? There was no choice. It wasn't a matter of whether he was willing or not, but he had to do it. Otherwise, a disaster would be right in front of him. Phew. Tang Xing exhaled. His face didn't look good, but there were still some things that needed to be said and some promises that needed to be made. "Mr. Tang, since doing this can eliminate the Khan's suspicion of me, I will lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern army." Belinsky was very happy that Tang Xing agreed so easily. But in order to make sure that the other party didn't do nothing, he continued to promise, "That's good. If that's the case, no one will be able to slander the general. That's right, the general only needs to lead the troops. I will ask the Khan to send troops to help you. When the time comes, we will deal with the Far Eastern army and have done a great service. I hope the general won't forget my contribution." Of course, of course." Tang Sheng was relieved when he heard that the Mongolian cavalry would help him. He had hidden many spies in the Far Eastern Army. Those people were like him, not pure Han people. They wouldn't be loyal to the Far Eastern Army. With these spies and the help of the 2nd Cavalry Division and the Mongolian soldiers, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with the Far Eastern Army that had already been discovered. Tang Sheng agreed and personally sent Belinsky out of the residence with a look of gratitude. At the same time, he promised that he would gather the troops now and leave the city tomorrow morning to find the Far Eastern Army. Good news would come soon. Tang Sheng didn't know that he had been completely used by Belinsky and abandoned by Hulihan. He had become an abandoned pawn and had to cover for the Mongolian army's departure. It could be said that he had made the best use of everything. Chapter 1387. Belinsky happily went to see Hulihan. First he explained Tang Sheng's attitude. Then he suggested that the moment Tang Sheng left the city the next day, they would seal the city and loot the entire city. They would take everything that could be used or taken away and quickly leave this place. They would return to Siberia to recuperate and prepare for the next battle. Hulihan happily accepted Belinsky's suggestion. However, at the same time, he was also alarmed. This merchant was too cunning, so much so that he had to be wary. He even wondered if he could kill this merchant if he had the chance. When the time came, he would be able to obtain the merchant's wealth and avoid a huge danger. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? Unfortunately, Belinsky did not know this. He was still fantasizing about how he could expand his caravan in Siberia with Hulihan's support. He even thought that without Akhmu, Hulihan would be in urgent need of talents. He should have the ability to take over this position. This was the difference between a merchant and a ruthless person. Merchants thought more about benefits and how to make use of each other in a win-win situation. Ruthless people were different. They mostly did things based on their hearts. Once they realized that there was danger, they would kill without any reason. As for the consequences, that was something to be discussed in the future. As for Tang Sheng, after receiving Belinsky's reminder, he began to gather his troops that afternoon. After bringing enough rations for 5 days, he bade farewell to his clansmen early the next morning and led his troops out of Archung. Not long after he left the city gates were closed. At the same time, they began to loot. In order not to attract attention, there was no fire in the city. Everything that could be looted was looted, and those that could not be taken away were smashed. For a time, the city was in a mess. Even General Tang Sheng's residence did not escape. Belinsky personally led the army to charge in, and then there was a round of looting. Tang Sheng was a division commander. When he chased Chen Bo and the others away, he took a lot of good things. Now they were all in the treasury. Now Belinsky had benefited from them. When they saw the boxes of good things being carried out of the Tang residence, the clansmen who stayed behind to guard the residence could not take it anymore. They all went forward to stop these actions. This made Belinsky unhappy. Since he had decided to go all the way, he gave the order and the Mongol cavalry began to kill. Very quickly, the Tang manor was filled with blood and the stench of blood filled the air. Even after all of the clansmen had died, many of them still had their eyes wide open, as if they had died with a grievance. They really couldn't imagine that the person who came to the residence yesterday and was sent away by Tang Sheng with endless gratitude would suddenly reveal killing intent today and kill all of them. What exactly was going on? The chaos in all city also affected the intelligence personnel of the 5-star army in the city. However, because some of them were dressed like beggars and had no money, they did not attract the attention of the Mongolian soldiers. When the situation in the city became more and more chaotic, the intelligence personnel used a new battery that had just been sent into the city to turn on the radio and broadcast the situation outside. At this moment, Yang Chendong was leading his army towards Archung. At this time, the number of troops had reached nearly 20,000. Apart from the 10,000 soldiers, there were also many Mongol captives as well as many Russian clansmen nearby. 3 battles, 3 victories, and Yang Chendong used his actions to prove the strength of the 5-star army. He also attracted the respect of some hot-blooded Russians like Nikolaev. They had even expressed their desire to join the 5-star army. Once they entered Archung, they would be able to achieve their wish. This was Yang Chendong. No matter what the situation was, he could always make the troops grow like a snowball. In the end, they would become a colossus that would strike fear into the bones of all his opponents. As the army was advancing, the intelligence report from Arching was sent over. When the telegram was sent to Yang Chendong, his first thought was that the enemy was about to run. Tell Commander Tian Hu to come over immediately. The target had been exposed, so it was time to start a fire. Under the constant cooling, Chimbo fell into a deep sleep once again. This time it was different from the past. Chimbo had really fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, and his body's vital signs were also constantly recovering. It was only a matter of time before his body fully recovered. As for the military matters of the Far Eastern Army, before Chimbo fell asleep, he gave all the power to Commander Daikwa. As the person who followed Yang Chendong to the Far East, Daikwa had seen the strength of the five-star army. His loyalty to Yang Chendong was not something that the other commanders could compare to. Chimbo was relieved to give the power to this person. After Daikwa obtained the military power, the first thing he did was to take out the tiger talisman that Chimbo gave him. He sent someone to inform the 3rd Cavalry Division and the 5th Cavalry Division. He also allowed Commander Kong He to return to the army and lead the 2nd Cavalry Division to gather at the military headquarters. Even if there are unstable elements in the army, it should only be a small part. It is time to expose them. Commander Daikwa waved his hand and gave such a military order. There was nothing to be afraid of if there were pustules in the body. What was scary was that they did not dare to squeeze them out. Doing so would only make the problem worse. Since the 6th young master had already arrived with the army, even if these people jumped out, they would not be able to do anything. What was there to be afraid of? Out of his absolute trust in Yang Chendong, Daikwa let the army assemble without worry. He wanted to see who would jump out, and who would court death. At the same time, he also sent a report to Yang Chendong, informing him that the Far Eastern Army was not very stable and asking for reinforcements. Yang Chendong had thought a lot about the problem of the Far Eastern Army on the way here. Considering that he was entering alone, in order to expand the army, the political review of the source of soldiers was not so strict. As a result, there were all kinds of people mixed in. This was something he could understand. But understanding was not giving in. They ate his food and took his salary, but they wanted to rebel against his master. If he did not punish them well, where would the justice be? He handed over the task of getting rid of the traitors to Beta Persei, and allocated 1,000 men from the 2nd Battalion of the Black Cavalry, and 2,000 men from the 1st Cavalry Army. He wanted to deal with the unstable elements in the army with a thunderous force. Since he came to the Far East, a fortress like the first city would definitely be built here. After Beta Persei received the order, he quickly left with the army after Tian Hu left. Yang Chendong led the rest of the army straight to Archung. It was already chaotic there. The earlier they arrived, the earlier they could end the chaos there. After Daikwa received Yang Chendong's reply, he was full of confidence. The stage had been set up, and the next step was to see how those people with bad intentions would act. Tang Sheng brought more than 8,000 men from the Far Eastern Army's 4th Cavalry Division to the military forest where Chenbo was. What made people speechless was that this army was still wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army. This was also a helpless move. Although they surrendered to the Mongolian army with their division commander, the other party was too poor. They were so poor that they did not have any uniform at all. They had no choice but to gather here wearing the old military uniform. Wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army, they were now going to fight the 5-star army. The sarcasm was very obvious. The direct experience was that the morale of the soldiers of the 4th Cavalry Division was very low. Most of the soldiers' faces flashed with confusion. Not everyone was as ungrateful as Tang Sheng. These soldiers were all from poor families, and many of them were Russian men who had been bullied by the Mongolian cavalry. It was Chunbo who had built Al City after arriving in the Far Eastern region. He gave them food to eat, so that they would not starve to death and did not have to worry about their safety. Although Chunbo didn't bring the families of these soldiers to Al City for the sake of the overall stability of the situation, causing them to have a lot of worries in the future. However, their monthly wages were not little, and they were never late. With this money, they could buy some things in the city to support their own tribes. This was already something that made them feel very proud. Many warriors were still thinking that when the boys in their tribes grew up to be men, they would bring them to All City to join the army, so that they could better support their tribes. However, they did not expect Tang Sheng to betray them. When they received the news, many of the soldiers could not understand, and no one was willing to rebel with him. However, it was at this time that Tang Sheng stood up, saying that once they and the Mongolian army took over Al City, they could bring their tribes into the city and live a good life together. It was because of this that the soldiers were appeased, and they had no choice but to stand together with their enemies, the Mongolian cavalry. Tang Sheng had indeed kept his promise. After successfully chasing Chen Bo out of Al City, he agreed to let the soldiers bring their tribes into the city. However, what no one expected was that the current arching was no longer the arching of the past. The city had long since fallen under the control of the Mongol army. The series of measures that General Chen Bo had set for the citizens had all disappeared, and no one followed them. There were many smashing, killing, robbing and pillaging within the city, and sometimes it was even more chaotic than outside. Under such circumstances, who would bring their own tribes into the city? Wouldn't that be like sending sheep into a tiger's den? It was also at this time that Tang Sheng stood up again, saying that the chaos would end soon. As long as the Mongols weren't stupid, Al City would return to peace. Everyone just needed to wait patiently, and Al City would become a true refuge for everyone. In order for this day to come sooner, they needed to eliminate the Far East Army first. They had to get rid of this big problem first. It was under such circumstances that the 4th Cavalry Division left Al City, following Tang Sheng to 50 miles north of the city. They acted as if they were going to attack the Far Eastern Army headquarters. Tang Sheng, who had just arrived, met up with the Mongol commander, Yu, and learned that the Far East Army, which had been hidden for many days, was gathering here. Yu welcomed Tang Sheng's arrival very much. There were only 2,000 Mongolian cavalry here. Although they felt that their fighting strength was not bad, the Far Eastern Army was said to have tens of thousands of soldiers. In terms of numbers, the difference was still too great. Chapter 1388. Tang Sheng's arrival was not just a matter of increasing the number of soldiers by nearly 10,000. This person was once a division commander of the Far East Army, and had many old friends in the army. If this matter was handled well, turning an enemy into a friend, how much help would he gain? General Tang, we will launch the attack tomorrow. When the time comes, both sides will be at the foot of the mountain. I hope that the general can use his glib tongue to gain merit before the battle. At that time, I will truthfully report everything I see to the Khan. Ulu said with a fake smile on his face. He was reminding and also warning Tang Sheng that tomorrow's battle was very important, and that he must do his best. Your praise will also be known to the Khan. You must not miss such an opportunity to gain merit. Yes, this general understands. Tang Sheng cupped his fists and said with a very humble attitude. Although the other party was not as good as him in terms of numbers, the other party was a Mongolian general. In comparison, he was far inferior. He had no choice but to flatter the other party. Ulu left the tent, leaving Tang Sheng behind to think about some information about the officers of the Far Eastern Army. If he wanted to persuade those people before the battle, he had to do some homework in advance. This battle would also determine his position in Hulihan's heart. He did not dare to be careless in the slightest. Of course, if he knew that Hulihan had already abandoned him and fled, and that his mansion in All City had long been robbed by the people he trusted, Belinsky, and the people he regarded as his life had also been killed, he probably would not have such thoughts now. At the same time, in the headquarters of the Far Eastern Army in the mountains, Daikwa also contacted Beta Persei's reinforcements who had arrived at the periphery. When he knew that Beta Persei was already outside the mountains with 4,000 cavalry and could appear at any time, Daikwa's heart was greatly relieved. He also began to look forward to the arrival of dawn. He wanted to see how many disloyal people there were in the army. He could take advantage of this opportunity to take them all down. The night would eventually pass. On the morning of the second day, Both armies began to gather outside their respective tents, as if they had discussed it beforehand. Both sides had their own thoughts, but with the same goal. They did not fight to the death right from the start. Instead, they arranged themselves in a formation, looking like they wanted to use their power to suppress the other party. The Mongolian army had over 10,000 cavalry. Adding the 3 divisions of the Far Eastern Army and 20,000 cavalry, they had over 30,000 cavalry. Fortunately, the open space under the mountain forest was not small. But even so, from afar, all kinds of flags fluttered high up in the sky and stood in all directions, giving off a boundless and endless feeling. It took nearly 4 hours, starting from dawn until the sun was high in the sky. Finally, the armies of both sides were in formation. Then it was time for the commanders of each side to take the stage. As for the 5-star army, Chen Bo was still recovering, so he did not appear. The one who replaced him was Dai Qua. This was enough to show his authority from the fact that Chen Bo's guard captain, Xia Qian, appeared beside him. Other than Dai Qua, the 2nd Division's commander, Kong He, the 3rd Division's commander, Shi Xiaolin, and the 5th Division's commander, Wu Ba, all appeared with their respective cavalry. But what was interesting was that these 3 divisions were not gathered together. They maintained a certain distance between each division, giving off a sense of vigilance. In comparison, the Mongol army only had Tang Sheng, Ulu, and a few other generals at the front, and their numbers were much lesser. But the advantage was that they seemed to be united. More importantly, Tang Sheng was going to recruit them. This was the most important thing. This was because if this matter was done well, the military strength and morale of both sides would decrease while the other side would increase. It was even possible for there to be a reversal. After both sides were in formation, Tang Sheng rode out under General Ulu's signal. In the sudden silence of both camps, this action was too eye-catching no matter how one looked at it. As Tang Sheng leaped out of the formation, all kinds of discussions began to spread uncontrollably below. There were very few generals in the Far Eastern Army who did not recognize this 4th Division's commander. Especially this time, the Far Eastern Army had lost Al City, and it was all because of this person. This time, it was difficult to not recognize him. He was just a traitor. No one knew what he wanted to do. Could it be that he wanted to repent after seeing the strength of the Far Eastern Army? A few Far Eastern Army soldiers who did not know the truth thought like this. Only some officers who had other thoughts revealed an indescribable expression in their eyes. It was unknown whether they were happy, hesitant, or hesitant. Before Tang Sheng spoke, they probably hadn't made a final decision. Commander Dai, the traitor Tang Sheng has come out. Please allow this general to kill him. The head of the guards, Xia Qian, glared at Tang Sheng and clenched his fists when he saw him gallop out. His eyes were filled with hatred as he spoke. No rush, no rush. Let's wait and see. On the other hand, Dai Qua was not anxious at all. On the contrary, he was looking forward to the other party's performance. He wanted to see how many loyal generals and villains there were in the Far Eastern Army now. Dai Qua had no intention of stopping him. Even if the other officers wanted to charge and kill the enemy, they had no choice but to suppress their anger. They wanted to see what this Tang Sheng had to say. In the eyes of these brave people, if you did something wrong, you should be punished. Even if Tang Sheng said something, they would not easily forgive him. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Tang Sheng first swept his gaze over the Far Eastern Army. After recognizing many of his colleagues, he finally opened his mouth slowly. Everyone, I don't think I need to introduce myself. Everyone knows me. Yes, I am the traitor in the eyes of some of you. Just like that, Tang Sheng's actions caused another round of discussion to erupt from the 2 great formations. Everyone was discussing. They had never seen such a shameless person. He actually admitted that he was a traitor. Without waiting for the discussion to continue fermenting, Tang Sheng shouted again. But I want to say now, I am not a traitor. I am loyal to my tribe. Half of my blood is Mongol. The reason why I led the Mongol army into Arching was to protect my tribe and continue to reproduce. What's wrong with that? Tang Sheng was almost shouting when he asked, "What's wrong?" After saying this, his face became a little ferocious. Is it wrong to think for my tribe? If that's the case, what's the point of being born? If I can't even protect my own family, How can I be a man? How can I be a man? Hearing this, many of the soldiers sucked in a breath of cold air. These words could be said to be heart-wrenching. In ancient times, many soldiers rushed to the battlefield and shouted the slogan to be loyal to the king, to the country. But was this really the case? How many of the so-called loyal people had seen the emperor? How many people had feelings for the so-called country? In the end, soldiers fighting was just a way to make a living. Simply speaking, it was to survive. If there were other purposes, it would be to get promoted and get rich. Therefore, the slogan to be loyal to the king was just a slogan. No one would really think that way. On the contrary, more people did it for the sake of being able to survive in troubled times. There were also some people who were lucky and were promoted from soldiers to officers with some authority. Then their goal would be higher. This was how they filled their own pockets and how they could take advantage of the situation to create more wealth for themselves. In this way, there was the so-called eating empty pay and stealing military supplies. The direct result of this was that the upper echelons of the military wanted to win the war. This was more beneficial to their future promotion and wealth, and even their wives and children. The middle-level officers, especially those young generals who didn't have much room for promotion, thought the opposite. They wanted to win the war. In this way, the matter of them moving public funds would be impossible to investigate, along with the defeat and the death of some people. They could even take advantage of this opportunity to eat more empty pay and get some empty pay. As for the soldiers at the bottom, they were only following orders. If the situation was to their advantage, they would rush up and fight to see if there was a chance to obtain any benefits. On the other hand, once the situation was unfavorable, they would just turn around and run. Staying alive was the most important thing. As for whether or not they won the war, what did it have to do with them? Or rather, there wouldn't be any change in the future. If that was the case, why should they risk their lives? These were some of the true portrayals of the military. Then could such an army win the war? Without faith, without spiritual support, and without even daring to have hope, could an army expand and unleash their potential? The answer was obviously yes. It was also because of this that Tang Xing didn't feel any shame for his rebellion. On the contrary, he could still speak frankly in front of everyone without a change in expression. This wasn't because he was thick-skinned, but because his thoughts and perspective were different. After Tang Xing shouted out what was wrong, his gaze swept across the Far Eastern Army. Then, he began to call out names. Commander Chiwu, as far as I know, your tribe is also outside of All City. Once winter comes, they have to face the pressure of the wind and snow. May I ask, what can you do for them? If you can't, what's the point of being a commander? Vice Commander Zhang Hai, your situation is the same. Let me ask you, how do you feel at ease? Battalion Commander Li Dai, I heard that 3 of your tribesmen have already frozen to death in the heavy snow this winter. Don't tell me you want to continue with the 4th and 5th? Tang Xing was calling out names. It wasn't targeted at a specific division. It was completely random. He would call out the name of whoever he saw. There were people in a few divisions who were called out. Chapter 1389. All the officers who were called out lowered their heads, proving that Tang Xing was right, proving that they were having a complicated struggle in their hearts. These people were the unstable elements in the Far Eastern Army. They were the internal problems that Commander Chen Bo was worried about. After Arching was taken down, he did not immediately launch a counterattack. Instead, he split up the army and hid them. He was afraid that the problem would be too big. Now, after hearing Tang Xing's words, many people had been bewitched to the point that they were ready to make a move. This was especially so for some of the officers who were called out. When they noticed the changes in the gazes of the people around them, they knew that there was no point in hiding anymore. Thus, they decided to stand out and walk towards the Mongolian camp where Tang Xing was. Some of them did not only bring a single officer, they also brought their brothers and soldiers with them as they walked towards the Mongol cavalry camp. Stop them! Xia Qian saw that the situation was about to turn bad and quickly shouted. At this moment, Kong He and the other 3 division commanders also looked over. They looked at Dai Qua, who was still riding on his horse calmly. Under everyone's gaze, Dai Qua slowly raised his right hand and said calmly, Don't stop them. Their hearts are no longer with the 5-star army. They can still be of use to us. We have to respect their choice. If there are others who have the same thoughts, you can also walk over. Not only did he not stop them, he even supported them. This made everyone confused. Tang Sheng also saw Dai Quo's actions and laughed. He then said, I didn't expect General Dai Quo to be such a reasonable person. However, I don't know if you have the same thoughts. You can come over as well. Don't worry, with this general here, I will ensure your wealth and glory. Tang Sheng was actually persuading Dai Quo to surrender. When Xia Qian heard this, he couldn't help but reach for the scimitar at his waist. He was even prepared to kill Dai Quo if Dai Quo really dared to do that. He would never allow anything to happen to the Far East army that the commander had single-handedly created. Dai Quo also did not expect such a move. He noticed that there were roughly 3,000 people from the Far Eastern army who had walked out and joined the Mongol army. Although there were still some people who looked hesitant, they didn't do anything out of line. These people could still be won over, so he thought it was time to stop. While Tang Sheng was comforting him, he said, Glory and wealth. Haha, Tang Sheng, are you joking with me? Since Dai Quo had responded, Tang Sheng was naturally delighted. He was afraid that the other party wouldn't say or do anything. If that happened, he wouldn't know where to start. But once the other party opened his mouth, his opportunity appeared. If there was a problem, there was nothing to be afraid of. All they had to do was solve it. Tang Sheng smiled and wanted to ask why there was no glory and wealth. But before he could speak, Dai Quo continued. The Mongolians are so poor that they don't even have a uniform. The soldiers don't even have spare cavalry swords. They don't even bear to put salt in their food. Tell me, where did the glory and wealth come from? The Mongolians were really poor. When they didn't know how to produce and couldn't rob others, their lives were actually very poor. The Mongolians that everyone saw killing cows and sheep were the modern Mongolians, not the old Mongolians. In the past, the Mongolians weren't good at producing. They only knew how to herd animals. If they wanted to eat a good meal, they had to wait until something happened to their animals or they died. Those were the animals that they relied on to survive. The males had to be kept, and the females had to be prepared to give birth. How could they just casually eat them? It was because they were poor that they had to go around robbing. Dai Quo's question made Tang Sheng's expression change. He didn't know how to answer. And this was just the beginning. Through the radio, Dai Quo knew and prepared much more than Tang Sheng. He looked at Tang Sheng with a contemptuous gaze and said, The glory and wealth you told everyone about should be just a saying. You're trying to deceive everyone, right? But how wise am I? How could I be so easily fooled like these idiots? As he spoke, Dai Quo pointed at the men who had just joined the Mongolian army from the Far Eastern army. Being reprimanded, the traitors who had a guilty conscience naturally lowered their heads. There were also some people who looked at Tang Sheng. Evidently, they wanted to hear his explanation. They wanted to know if the glory and wealth he had mentioned was real or fake. Seeing these people staring at him, Tang Sheng felt his hair stand on end. He quickly waved his hands and explained, Everyone, don't listen to his nonsense. He's just messing with our morale. Messing with your morale? Ha ha ha, you think too highly of yourself. Do you think you're worthy of talking about morale? You're just a bunch of mobs. You'll go wherever there are benefits. You don't have any principles at all. You don't know what loyalty is. You don't deserve to be human. Dai Quo's voice was very loud as he shouted at Tang Sheng and the soldiers who had just surrendered. This shout made Tang Sheng and the others feel a sense of panic. In order to stabilize the morale of the army, he had to shout as loudly as well. He's talking nonsense. The Mongolian army has now taken over Al City. Everyone has seen the wealth and prosperity there with their own eyes. Yes, yes. Because of Tang Sheng's words, the traitors who had been slightly shaken started to nod their heads again. They then glared at Dai Quo fiercely as if saying, You're talking nonsense, you're messing up our morale. Al City prosperous. Ha ha ha. As if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, Dai Quo looked up to the sky and laughed. Although he was also a division commander in the Far Eastern Army, he had been traveling with Yang Qindong for a while, and had conquered many territories. He had seen a lot and the prosperity of Al City was not worth mentioning in his eyes. Although he had not been to Chichen City, just the prosperity of the beginning city was many times better than Al City. After laughing for a while, Daikwa seemed to have finished expressing the laughter in his heart. Then he looked at Tang Sheng and the others with disdain and said, "In your eyes, Al City might be very busy, but right now it is not in my eyes. Taking a step back, what does the prosperity of Al City have to do with you? Do you really think that the Mongolians will treat you as their own and give you benefits?" Tang Sheng's face was a little ugly. Of course, he knew that the Mongolians were always on guard against him. In the past 3 months, he had felt it deeply in Al City. However, at this moment, when the armies were about to clash, he definitely could not admit it. Not only that, he had to praise the Mongolian army. Only then would he be able to raise their morale and obtain victory. After hesitating for a few breaths, Tang Sheng opened his mouth and said, "Why can't you give it to us? I might as well tell you that Hulihin has already agreed. In the future, Al City will belong to us. Other than our families, our people can also move in." What? Did the Mongolian Great Khan really say that? If that's the case, it's a great thing. In an instant, the Far Eastern Army soldiers started to mutter and discuss. Previously, because the city was too small and could not accommodate so many people, Chunbo made the rule that other than soldiers, ordinary people could not enter the city. It was also because of this that it attracted all sorts of complaints and caused Tang Sheng to rebel. Tang Sheng also grasped this point, which was why his actions had gained the support of more soldiers. It was only because of his call that more than 3,000 soldiers joined his side. This was Tang Sheng's trump card. The reason why he was so confident that he could face the Far Eastern Army with just 10,000 cavalry was also because of this reason. Right now, everyone was discussing animatedly, and the public opinion was obviously leaning towards his side. In order to stabilize the situation and also to speed up Daikwa's defeat, he intentionally looked at the Mongolian General Ulu and said, "If everyone doesn't believe me, you can go and ask General Ulu." Ulu had never heard that the Mongolian army wanted to take control of Al City with Tang Sheng. However, he was not stupid enough to deny all of this. He thought that as long as he won the battle, he could do whatever he wanted. He immediately laughed and said, "That's right, General Tang Sheng is right. The Great Khan did say that he was willing to take control of Al City with the brothers of the Far Eastern Army and share the world." "You're lying." Just as Wu Lu finished speaking and Tang Sheng's expression relaxed, Daikwa shouted loudly, "Stop it!" Daikwa shouted. He did not expect Tang Sheng to be so shameless. Furthermore, this Mongolian general was actually lying through his teeth. He had already received the telegram. The Mongolian army had already left Arching after looting the place. How could he say such a thing? Knowing that the other party was lying, Daikwa could not let him continue. After he interrupted the other party's words, he said loudly, "Everyone, don't listen to their nonsense. Truth be told, the Mongol army has already left Alair City after a round of inhumane pillaging." Nonsense. Daikwa's words immediately caused Ulu and Tang Sheng to refute in unison. One of them was one of Hulihin's favorite generals, while the other was entrusted with an important task to deal with the Far Eastern Army. With such a status, how could he believe that Hulihan had already betrayed him? The two naturally did not believe it, but Daikwa, who had received the news, laughed and said, "I knew you wouldn't believe it, but don't worry, there will be evidence in front of you soon. Come on, release the signal." Chapter 1390. The so-called signal was a dazzling firework. Although the effect was a little worse during the day, the loud noise and the scene of the explosion in the sky could still be clearly seen. After the firework was released, rumbling sounds could be heard from the ground. At the same time, a Mongol cavalry scout quickly came to General Ulu's side. "General, we've discovered the enemy. About 4,000 enemy cavalry suddenly appeared behind us. They're flying the 5-star Army's flag." An excellent scout would be able to quickly determine the number of enemies. Just from this point alone, this scout was qualified. However, he only came to report after the rumbling sounds of the war horses. It was too late, so he did not pass. "Bastard! Why did you only report back now?" Wu Lu cursed angrily and lashed out with his horsewhip at the scout. The scout had a wronged expression on his face. He wanted to say that the enemy cavalry was completely covered in green leaves, and could not be seen unless they were right in front of them. But at this moment he no longer had the chance to speak, because behind them, the bright 5-starred flag that could not be ignored was already in sight. They had already arrived at the battlefield. When the scout came to report, the Mongol cavalry had already put up a basic resistance. However, when faced with the elite 1st Cavalry Army, how could these Mongol cavalry be a match for them? In just one charge, hundreds of corpses were thrown to the side. Just as they heard the sound of hooves, the 5-star army had already arrived in front of them. When they got closer, they could see that some of the war horses still had green leaves on them. Camouflage and infiltration was one of the training courses of the 5-star army. Furthermore, they already knew the location of the battle, so it was not difficult to enter the battlefield without being discovered. Everyone listen to my orders, stop. Beta Persei's loud voice sounded out, and the Mongol cavalry immediately stopped. Their formation was neat and orderly, and it was obvious that they were well-trained elites. They did not make a sound, and other than the snorting of the horses, there was no other sound. They all waited for Beta Persei's next order. There was a kind of aura that made people admire him and fear him, not daring to look at him directly. For example, right now there was a person who had such an aura. His chest was straighter than ever, and his footsteps were steady and sonorous. His gaze was clear and transparent, as if he could look straight into the depths of one's heart. In fact, whether it was a war or a fight between two people, the key to victory was one's mentality. When facing an enemy, he would have the absolute aura of a cat against a mouse. When he was the number one in the world, he would definitely crush his opponent. Then he would win. Although there were only 4,000 cavalry under Yang Er's command, they gave off a feeling that they were an invincible army with thousands of men and horses. They were both cavalry, but in comparison, the Mongol cavalry was much weaker. This could be seen from the shock on the Mongol soldiers' faces. Without comparison, there would be no harm. The 5-star army's military formation was neat, and they were all dressed in the same uniform. Their sabers were of the same length and size, and under the sunlight, they emitted waves of cold light. Even when he was riding on a horse, he was still riding horizontally and vertically, giving people a very shocking visual impression. The formation wasn't trained for nothing, and the effect was very obvious. Not only did it make the soldiers more self-disciplined, but it also made them better at following orders. Just their mental appearance alone gave people a lot of pressure. This. When more Mongol cavalrymen looked at the 5-star army and didn't know how to describe their feelings, Ulu opened his mouth. Everyone, don't be afraid. They only have 4,000 people. As long as we charge forward, victory will belong to us. Let's see who dares. Beta Persei faced Ulu's shout, and after a loud shout, the 4,000 5-star army raised their sabers high, and a soul-shaking aura surged out. There were less than 2,000 Mongol cavalrymen left, and they were completely shocked by the aura of the 5-star army. At this moment, they found that they didn't have the courage to take a step forward. As the commander of the army, Ulu naturally saw everything. Because of this, he cleverly didn't take a step forward. Instead, he looked at Tang Sheng and said, "General Tang, let's go together. As long as we can destroy these Han reinforcements, the main force of the Mongol cavalrymen will arrive soon. At that time, no one will be our opponent." Ulu wanted Tang Sheng and the others to charge first, and then he could sit back and reap the benefits. In his eyes, even 10 Far Eastern Army soldiers weren't as important as a Mongol soldier. Tang Sheng wasn't stupid. How could he not see Ulu's intention? However, he didn't dare to act rashly. Putting aside the fact that he had already witnessed the might of the 5-star army when he sent reinforcements to the first city, there were still more than 20,000 soldiers of the Far East Army staring at him. Under the shout, Tang Sheng didn't move. Beta Persei saw everything inside. With his personality, since he had brought the army here, of course he would kill to his heart's content. What Mongol army? What Far East army? He had never placed them in his eyes. They were just a bunch of mobs. As long as he wanted, the 4,000 warriors of the world's first cavalry army could kill all of them. However, he couldn't do this. Before he came, The young master had instructed that the construction of the Far East region needed people the most. A large number of young people. The people in front of him were all strong laborers. They were indispensable talents to build the city and consolidate the territory. If he killed them, who would build the city and who would repair the roads? In order to complete the task given by Yang Chendong, it was impossible to kill a lot of people. However, he could still kill a chicken to show respect. He had to do it. Some people were like this. If you didn't kill them, they wouldn't know fear. However, before he took action, Beta Persei still needed to do something. This was very important to destroy the enemy's morale, establish the final victory, and even unify their hearts. Come bring them here. Beta Persei didn't give the order to attack immediately. Instead, he shouted to bring people. Soon, the 5-star army soldiers escorted 2 men to the battlefield. They arrived in front of the open space between the 2 camps. Of the 2 people, one was a skinny man wearing a Mongol army uniform, and the other was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s. Both of their faces were pale, and they were trembling with fear. As soon as the 2 of them were brought out, there were 2 loud shouts from the battlefield. Tuoba Shur? Li Hui. The one called Tuoba Shur was the Mongol soldier. He had another identity, which was General Ulu's personal guard. Previously, he didn't follow the army out of the city, because he wasn't feeling well. Instead, he stayed in All City. The one called Li Hui was Tang Sheng's clansman. When the Tang residence's treasures were stolen and his clansmen were killed, Li Hui wasn't in the residence, so he escaped death. These 2 people, because of their special identities, were targeted by Yang Xie's intelligence personnel in All City. They were captured alive and sent out of the city. Last night, Yang Heir had already sent someone to pick up the 2 of them. What he wanted was to use their mouths to tell the truth. He wanted Ulu and Tang Sheng to see what kind of person the great Khan Hulihan, whom they served, was. Wu Lu and Tang Sheng were naturally the ones who shouted. It was just their instinct to shout out loud. In contrast, after the 2 people who were called saw their respective masters, their tears uncontrollably flowed out. When a person brushed past death and saw their loved ones, they would definitely reveal their true feelings. General, young clan leader, it's all gone, it's all gone. Tuoba Shur and Li Hui didn't wait for anyone to ask. With tears and snot, they recounted everything that had happened in Al City and what had happened to their family. After that, whether it was Ulu or Tang Sheng, when they heard that Hulihan had led his troops out of Al City and fled to the Siberian region, it was as if they were struck by lightning. They stood in place, not moving at all. Although they did not know why the Great Khan had retreated, one thing was for sure. They were all abandoned people, abandoned as pawns thrown here. Ulu couldn't understand why his Great Khan would abandon him. Tang Sheng's face was full of shame. He thought of how Belinsky persuaded him to send out troops. Belinsky wanted to abandon him, but at the same time, he also wanted to steal his treasures. When he thought of how he had mistakenly trusted Belinsky, and how he and Li Hui were the only 2 people left in the entire tribe, he couldn't help but scream. Belinsky, you liar, you despicable, you bastard. It was because Tang Sheng believed in Belinsky that he became a traitor to the Far Eastern Army and came to this point. But what he got was betrayal and the destruction of his tribe. If he could do it all over again, Tang Sheng would not have made such a choice. Whether it was Ulu or Tang Sheng, they both had fierce looks in their eyes as they cursed everything that had happened to them. This scene was seen by the other officers and soldiers, and all of them fell into deep thought. This was especially so for the Far Eastern Army that had defected with Tang Sheng. They thought that after joining their new master, they would be able to enjoy glory and wealth. At the very least, they would be able to ensure the safety of their tribesmen. But now not only would they not be able to save their tribesmen, they would also not have a good ending. After all, traitors never had a good ending. The atmosphere of the battlefield changed drastically because of the appearance of Tuoba Shur and Li Hui. The most obvious change was that the Far East Army that had surrendered had become restless and restless. Charge! With such a good opportunity, how could Beta Persei let it go? With an order, the 4,000 5-star army cavalry behind him moved, raising their sabers and urging their horses forward. The first to bear the brunt of this attack were the 2,000 Mongol cavalry. Their morale was already low, and Tuobasher's appearance had destroyed their hope. Just as their morale was at its lowest, the 5-star army charged over. How could they stop them? Chapter 1391. When the arrow formation stabbed into the Mongol cavalry camp, the resistance they faced could be said to be minuscule. This allowed the attack of the 5-star Legion Corps to go really smoothly. With just one charge, they charged into the enemy formation, and no one could stop them. Block them, block them. Ulu, who finally came back to his senses, shouted at the army as he looked at Tang Sheng and said, "General Tang, although we have been abandoned, we have to kill our way out for ourselves. Otherwise, what awaits us will be worse than death." How could Tang Sheng not know? He was a traitor, and from a certain point of view, he was far more hateful than the enemy. Once he was caught by the 5-star army, he would probably suffer a fate worse than death. Tang Sheng did not want to die and could not die. He still wanted to take revenge on Belinsky. He immediately waved his sword and shouted to his troops, "Everyone, follow me and kill our way out. Let's find Hulihan and take revenge." With a loud shout, Tang Sheng was the first to gallop out of the camp. The group of personal guards beside him also followed suit. However, that was it. Including the soldiers, there were only 20 or so cavalry. As for the others, including Qi Wu, Zhang Shi, and Li Dei, they all stood in place and did not move at all. The soldiers behind them also followed beside their general. They also had no intention of charging out of the battle. When the 5-star army's reinforcements arrived and Hulihan fled without saying anything, it was clear that the situation was over. Anyone with a brain would not make the decision to become enemies with the 5-star army. Other than the 20 or so soldiers, there was actually no one following them. Tang Sheng's face revealed a trace of loneliness. However, he did not blame these people. They had already followed him down the wrong path. He could not drag them to their deaths. "Come, follow me and kill our way out. Kill." Tang Sheng was determined to fight to the death. He was the first to charge towards the 5-star army. He knew very well what he had done. Even if he surrendered now, he would not benefit at all. Since that was the case, he might as well take the risk. If he could really break out, he would definitely find a way to find Belinsky and take revenge for the extermination of his clan. Surround them all. Don't let a single one escape. Beta Persei was riding on a big, strong horse, his face full of excitement. After following Yang Qindong for so many years, there were fewer and fewer opportunities for him to take action, let alone the opportunity to lead an army alone. It wasn't easy for him to let go of everything and go on a killing spree. He would cherish it very much. "Come, don't waste any more time. Both of you, come at me together." Beta Persei laughed heartily as he casually pointed his broadsword at Ulu and Tang Sheng. It was as if he was looking down on the world. Attack together. After Ulu and Tang Sheng exchanged a look, they nodded in unison. Then they whipped their horses and charged towards Beta Persei. This was their only chance. With 2 against 1, their chances of winning were still very high. As long as they could capture this general, they would be able to force their way out of the encirclement. Wu Luoning had become a general among the mini-Mongolian cavalry. His own ability was naturally unquestionable. There was no culture at all, and one could not rely on qualifications and other resources. Those who could become generals were undoubtedly extremely capable. Tang Sheng was the same. To be able to stand out among so many people and be appointed as a teacher, his own combat strength must be very strong. Both of them were like this. Together, they could be considered a strong combination. If they only fought one person, their chances of winning were quite high. At least in the Far Eastern Army, Chunbo, including the army commander, would not be a match for him. But who was Beta Persei? He was one of the 5 members of the Yang Qindong family. He had been by Yang Qindong's side all year round. Apart from being different from the rest, his own combat strength was also constantly improving. If his strength was too weak, he would not have the face to stay by Yang Qindong's side. Not to mention other things, if there was really danger, who would protect who? It was not an exaggeration to say that in the entire Yangxia, the entire 5-star army, Beta Persei was not ranked number 1 in terms of leading troops to war. He also did not have much experience, but if it was a one-on-one battle, then there were really not many people who could be his opponent. With Yang Chendong's personal guidance and the Black Knights and Dragon Guards feeding him moves every day, he was not afraid at all even if it was just 1 versus 2. He pulled out the divine sword from his waist. When he was fighting 2 people by himself, Beta Persei not only did not take a defensive position, but also took the initiative to launch an attack. He would not forget what Yang Chendong had said, that offense was the best defense. Relying on the strength of the divine sword in his hand, Beta Persei was full of confidence as he pulled his horse forward. The 3 generals immediately fought together. Under the gaze of many Far Eastern army soldiers, the wind from their swords collided, and the blades struck each other. The 3 of them were almost all fighting openly, without the slightest bit of hypocrisy. It was completely a competition of strength and technique. This kind of battle also took into account one's own physique. If one's strength was not enough, one might show signs of defeat after just 1 blow. If one showed a flaw, it would often cost one's life. In a battle of life and death, a little negligence and a trace of insufficient strength could lead to the loss of one's life. As generals, the 3 of them naturally understood this principle. Therefore, when they attacked, they used all their strength. It was a fight to the death. Ding ding dang. The divine sword in Beta Persei's hand collided twice in a very short period of time, colliding with the divine sword in the hands of Ulu and Tang Sheng respectively. As the saying goes, once an expert makes a move, one will know whether or not he is an expert. In this first exchange, the 3 of them had a preliminary impression of each other at the same time. Especially Ulu and Tang Sheng, who felt the numbness in their arms after the first blow. Their faces had become a little nervous. They could feel that if they were to rely on strength alone, they would not be Beta Persei's opponent. Beta Persei belonged to the group of people with extraordinary strength. In addition, he was by Yang Chendong's side every day, eating and drinking well, and his strength was constantly increasing. In terms of strength alone, even the talented Black Cavalry was no match for him. Only the abnormal, Yang Chendong could suppress him. It was this confidence that made Beta Persei so confident when he was fighting against 2 people by himself. And after using his sword to fight against 2 people in a row, this confidence swelled even more. Haha, great. Beta Persei also felt a slight tremor in his arm. He laughed and turned around to attack. He had no intention of resting. It was a competition of strength, and he would not stop until he was dead. This person is so strong. Take my spear. After Tang Sheng felt the tremendous pressure from the sword, he knew that if this continued, perhaps before he could do anything to his opponent, his arm would become red and swollen, and he would not be able to exert any strength. He simply put away his sword and changed to a spear. He swapped the red Sakura spear hanging next to his horse. The reason why the cavalry mainly used the divine sword was because it was light and flexible. For example, the cavalry required fast speed, fast attack, and fast deployment. All of these had strict requirements for weapons. It was not that they could not use a spear. In history, there were cavalry who used heavy and powerful hammers as weapons. It was just that using such a weapon would inevitably affect their speed and flexibility in combat. As a result, most people used the divine sword. However, those who could use a spear were all people who believed themselves to be strong enough to use it. Otherwise, wouldn't they be giving up on flexibility and speed? Wouldn't they be courting death? Tang Sheng changed to a spear, which was enough to prove his confidence in himself and his satisfaction with his physical fitness. He wanted to use his strength to suppress Beta Persei, and then find a favorable opportunity for Ulu to attack. With the spear in his hand, Tang Sheng felt as if he was the king of the world. With a loud shout, Tang Sheng's chi sank into his dantian. Borrowing the power of the spear, he swung the spear at Yang Air. The spear swept through the air, causing a weak explosion. Good. Beta Persei, who was rushing over, also laughed. He did not have the slightest idea of retreating, because his opponent had changed his weapon. On the contrary, his fighting spirit was even more abundant. He was afraid that his opponent would not use his full strength. Just like when he was sparring with the Black Cavalry, everyone was afraid of accidentally injuring each other, so naturally, they would have a backup plan. It was not like this kind of life and death battle, where it was either you die or I die. There was no need to worry so much. Only then could a fight be called carefree. With a smile still on his face, Beta Persei had already urged his horse to come in front of Tang Sheng. His sword and spear collided several times in a very short period of time. There was a continuous sound of clashing, and because they were all so fast, it made the onlookers feel dazzled. With the length of the spear, Tang Sheng was able to restrain Beta Persei's attack for a while, keeping him at a distance of 10 feet. He was temporarily out of danger. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ulu attacked. He took advantage of the spear entangling the divine sword to launch a sneak attack and harass Beta Persei from the side. He did not expect to be able to hurt Beta Persei. As long as he could distract him, it was equivalent to creating an opportunity for Tang Sheng. Although it was the first time the two of them worked together, there were few flaws between them. Perhaps they also knew that this was a life and death battle, and it would be very dangerous if they did not use their full strength. So when they attacked, they used all their strength and displayed their strongest attacks and methods. Entangled by the spear and harassed by the dagger, Beta Persei fell into a passive situation. Several times he revealed some small flaws. Perhaps it was because he was strong enough that the dagger shook off his opponent's weapon several times, but he was afraid that he would have been injured by now. If it were someone else in this position, they would probably have to call for help. After all, the 5-star army had the advantage in terms of strength. And because of the bravery and strength of the warriors, nearly 2,000 Mongolian cavalry had been disrupted and were in the middle of being surrounded. It seemed that victory was already in sight. As such, there were hundreds of 5-star army cavalry around the 3-man group battle. They were here to prevent Ulu and Tang Sheng from escaping, and they were also prepared to support Beta Persei at any time. Chapter 1392. As long as Beta Persei shouted and retreated, the 5-star army cavalry watching from the sidelines would swarm forward. At that time, it would not be 2 against 1, but dozens of people against 1. But Beta Persei did not complain, nor did he have the slightest intention of backing down. His identity did not allow him to back down, and the celestial sword in his hand was where his confidence lay. He had already clashed with his opponent's weapon for more than a dozen rounds. The weapons in the hands of these two generals were not ordinary iron, at least much tougher than ordinary iron. But there was a limit to how strong they were. In the face of the celestial sword made with the highest forging technology in the world, it was only a matter of time before they broke. And once the opponent's weapon broke from the middle, it would be time for Beta Persei to launch a counterattack. Now he only needed to maintain enough physical strength and rely on his arm strength to not let the opponent hurt him. The 3 weapons were still clashing, and stars would appear from time to time, indicating that the 3 of them seemed to have used all their strength in each attack, and each attack was extremely dangerous. In this way, the 3 of them continued to attack for another 5 rounds. Beta Persei's eyes shone brightly when he saw that there was a large gap on the opponent's weapon. He knew that the celestial sword had finally taken advantage of his advantage. The opponent's weapon would break at any time, and his opportunity to counterattack had appeared. The time had come. Beta Persei suddenly shouted, and the strength in his arm increased by a bit, so much so that it reached 90% of his overall strength. He slashed the celestial sword at the body of the spear. Under the great force, Tang Sheng felt his arm tighten. Because of the great force, he almost fell off his horse. Fortunately, he managed to control himself at the last moment. When he looked up, he saw that Beta Persei had given up on him and was slashing his sword at Ulu. Good chance. Tang Sheng's eyes lit up. Then he gripped the spear tightly and thrust it forward. He only needed 2 breaths to stab the spearhead into Beta Persei's armor, severely injuring his opponent and capturing the most important hostage. Beta Persei seemed to treat Tang Sheng as an invisible person. At this time, he was slashing his saber at Ulu's body, looking like he was going to fight to the end. Ulu could tell that Beta Persei was going all out. Logically speaking, he should have urged his horse to retreat and avoid the brunt of Beta Persei's attack. For someone like him who grew up on horseback, he did not need to exert any force on the reins when advancing or retreating with his horse. He only needed to gently press his legs together to communicate with his horse and retreat in the face of battle. However, Ulu did not retreat. He needed to create favorable conditions and enough time for Tang Sheng to attack. This made it necessary for him to block a few slashes from the saber. Wu Lu was confident that he would be able to block 3 or 4 attacks within 2 breaths of time, rather than holding the saber with one hand. There was no problem with his strength. Ulu was confident about this. However, the problem was that his weapon could not do it. When faced with the divine cavalry saber that could cut through iron like mud, Wu Lu's cavalry saber had already been chipped. It was only because he had been fighting hard that he did not notice it. Ulu did not expect that his weapon, which had always been very tough, would be broken in half. Therefore, he still followed his previous fighting style, placing the saber on his body and defending himself. 1 hit, 2 hits. When the 3rd hit came, Beta Persei's saber slashed at the gap in Ulu's saber. Then, with a crisp breaking sound, the saber broke into 2 pieces. The sudden change caught Ulu off guard. Before he could react, the divine saber had already landed on Ulu's body. The sharp edge of the saber directly broke his bones. With just one blow, Ulu was cut into 2 halves. Blood splattered out as Yu'er's eyes widened in disbelief as he fell from his horse. Even as he died, he still could not understand how his weapon could suddenly break in half. Could it be that this Han general knew some kind of magic? Ulu was dead. He was cut in half and died in an extremely miserable manner. Blood also splashed on Beta Persei, but for Beta Persei, who had been on countless battlefields and killed countless enemies, he did not care at all. As if he had done an extremely simple thing, he turned around and prepared to deal with another enemy, Tang Sheng. It was also at this moment that he felt something poke his body. It did not hurt, so he immediately turned around to look. Beta Persei turned around and looked at the spot where he was stabbed. He saw a broken spearhead, Tang Sheng who was holding the spear, and the other party's frightened eyes. Just now, Beta Persei had used up 2 breaths of time to kill Ulu, which created enough opportunity for Tang Sheng. Next, he unceremoniously raised his spear and stabbed, with a victorious smile on his face. It was not until the spear stabbed out that his expression suddenly changed. He did not feel the tip of the spear entering his body, but only the feeling of the blade piercing into a hard boulder, unable to move forward. At the same time, Tang Sheng's gaze quickly turned to the tip of the spear. At some point, the tip of the spear had been broken, leaving only a wooden handle. At this time, the wooden handle was stabbed towards Beta Persei, and it hit the other party's exquisite armor. Beta Persei, who had been by Yang Chendong's side all year round, could be said to be a treasure from head to toe. Just like the armor he was wearing, it was thin and extremely hard. Yang Xie's munitions factory spent a lot of effort to make it. Such armor was also very rare in the entire 5-star army. With Beta Persei's status, it was naturally not a problem for him to get one. The spear was stabbed into the armor, unable to move forward. Tang Sheng was still in the same position, his face full of surprise and confusion. Seeing that Tang Sheng's spear had stabbed into his armor, Beta Persei's face was full of anger. Originally, Tang Sheng had betrayed the 5-star army, Yang Xie, and the young master, causing him to want to kill him. Now that Tang Sheng even wanted to kill him, this person could not be left alive. Beta Persei, who had already killed Ulu, gently turned around and easily moved the spear to the side. Then, the celestial saber slashed through the air and slashed towards Tang Sheng's neck. War has always been cruel. Either you die or I die. Beta Persei was furious. The saber was as fast as lightning. When Tang Sheng came back to his senses, he had only just raised the spear when the wooden spear was cut in half. The saber did not continue to fall and fell on Tang Sheng's neck, then quickly slashed. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and Tang Sheng's eyes gradually became blurred. At this time, he seemed to have seen the scene of him growing up with the help of the tribe when he was young. He also seemed to have seen the scene of him joining the Far Eastern Army and eating his first full meal. Then he rose step by step and finally became a division commander. Then his ambition began to grow, and his heart became unsatisfied until he did the wrong thing of betraying the Far Eastern Army. Tang Sheng was dead. Even when he died, his eyes were wide open, and he looked like he could not die in peace. No one knew what he was thinking before he died, and no one knew if he would regret his wrong actions and thoughts. With Tang Sheng's death, the soldiers he brought with him immediately became obedient, especially the more than 3,000 soldiers who had just chosen to surrender to him. Their faces were full of regret. If they had known that this would be the result, why did they stand out? Weren't they courting death? Nearly 2,000 Mongolian soldiers, half were killed and the other half were captured. More than 10,000 rebels from the Far Eastern Army were surrounded by Division Commander Daikua and 20,000 soldiers, and all of them chose to put down their weapons and surrender. Even Ulu and Tangsheng were not a match for them. Unless they did not want to live, who would dare to raise their swords against them? The rebellion was thus quelled, but the matter was not over. How to stabilize the people's hearts and win them over was an important task for Yang Chendong after arriving in the Far Eastern province. After 3 months of chaos and arching, Yang Chendong arrived. Along with him were thousands of 5-star army's elite cavalry, thousands of Mongolian captives, and thousands of ordinary Russian tribesmen. When Yang Chendong led the army into Al City, whose city walls weren't very tall, all he saw was a mess on the streets and chaos on the ground. On the streets, he could see the corpses of ordinary people lying on the ground. There were old people, women, and children. Many of them had been conquered by the 5-star army. They were the people who had come to support the Far Eastern province, but they did not expect to die in such a chaotic situation. Along the way, Yang Chendong's expression became uglier and uglier. These were his people, and they had actually died in the city. He had to take revenge for Hulihan. Fortunately, after inspecting the corpses, he discovered that there were very few Han people. Later on, Yang Chendong understood the situation in the city. When the Mongolian soldiers killed and looted, the few Han people in the city chose to hide. They threw away all their money in order to save their lives. These Han people persevered. As long as they were still alive, everything would still be there. Bugnam of Gojoseon would definitely bring them a better life. In order to survive, after the Mongol soldiers left, some of the criminals in the city started to pillage and kill. These Han Chinese once again chose to band together. They picked up their weapons and became a force to be reckoned with. As long as they did not take the initiative to find trouble with others, no one would find trouble with them. This was how they managed to survive until Yang Chendong's arrival. As Yang Chendong entered the city, the law and order in the city quickly stabilized. On the streets, the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army were patrolling the streets. They were dressed in neat military uniforms, riding on tall horses, and wielding divine weapons in their hands. Whenever they discovered someone doing something illegal on the streets, they would immediately lash out with their horsewhips and capture them. There was no room for discussion. Chapter 1393. The impartiality of the 5-star army's soldiers shocked some of the rebels, and made them more obedient. However, there were still some daring people who took advantage of the fact that the 5-star army's numbers were not high. They gathered their forces and attacked the patrolling soldiers of the 5-star army. They attacked with dozens of people, and even hundreds of people. These people were mostly white-skinned Russians. They took a liking to the soldiers' uniforms and sharp sabers, as well as the sturdy war horses they were riding. Facing the provocation and the rebels who were shouting and holding weapons such as sabers, sticks, clubs, and even hoes, the 5-star army did not hold back and killed them all. Since they dared to provoke the army, these people had already lost their humanity and deserved to die. Dozens of people, or even hundreds of people, could not even hold up against the charge of the world's #1 cavalry army, and suffered heavy casualties. The formation was in chaos and they scattered in all directions. Those who could not escape became members of the prison. In just a single afternoon, the prison of the Far Eastern Army was filled with people. Some of the people who were caught later could only be tied up in the square outside the prison. Fortunately, it was already the 5th month, and the weather was not too cold. They would not freeze to death. In troubled times, severe punishments were needed. When Yang Chendong heard the report that there were rebels in the city, he did not restrict the actions of the 5-star army soldiers. On the contrary, he supported them. He knew that one could not be merciful on the battlefield. Otherwise, one would be asking for trouble. There were some people that couldn't be reasoned with. Only continuous slaughter would make them realize their mistakes and realize the power of the 5-star army. Thus, they had no choice but to restrain themselves and become honest. While they were clearing out the unstable elements in all city, and had no choice but to kill, Tian Hu's 4,000 cavalrymen successfully intercepted Hulihan's troops who were escaping to the west. After a round of fighting, Hulihan brought 12,000 Mongol cavalrymen and escaped. On the other hand, Belinsky, who had too many items and could not bear to throw them away, was captured on the spot. He had personally witnessed the strength of the 5-star army. When he saw the strength of the 5-star army, the Mongol soldiers panicked and ran away with twisted faces. He saw that iron sabers and wooden spears were thrown all over the ground. The various items that they had snatched had also become burdens. They had all been abandoned in order to increase their speed. The army was defeated like a landslide. Countless Mongol cavalrymen, who were known as the strongest army, fled like sheep seeing wolves. They all exposed their backs to the 5-star army and were chased by the world's #1 cavalry army. They did not have any intention of resisting. This kind of strength only the Mongol cavalrymen, and some Mongol tribes did not belong to the Mongol army. Unexpectedly, there was always someone stronger. The 5-star army was actually so ferocious that the Mongol cavalrymen could not fight back at all. Belinsky was captured, but he was not depressed. On the contrary, he felt that this was an opportunity for him. Since the Mongol cavalrymen could not defeat the 5-star army, why would he not join the strong? With such a powerful cavalry as his backing, he would not have to be afraid of anyone when he went out to do business. With this beautiful thought in mind, Belinsky stopped the resistance of the guards of the caravan. They obediently surrendered their weapons. Belinsky also reported his identity. At the same time, he put forward his request. He wanted to see the highest general of the 5-star army here. He had some information to report. Tian Hu saw that Belinsky seemed like someone important. He also thought about how his teacher had just arrived and needed to understand the situation here through various channels. He also needed various people to help him complete his mission. As such, he nodded and agreed. He did not even use a rope to tie Belinsky up. He gave him a very relaxed environment and allowed him to come to arching with him. This also strengthened Belinsky's confidence. He believed that with his own abilities, he would be able to achieve great things. As for the fact that he had tricked the Far Eastern army, that was nothing. Wasn't it like this during times of war? Today we can drink and chat happily, but tomorrow we might fight. On the other hand, today we might be enemies, but tomorrow we might be friends. To sum it up, there was no such thing as an eternal friend, only eternal benefits. Because of the 5-star army's ruthless methods, arching went from chaos to peace. Then, when the Far Eastern army that had disappeared for 3 months suddenly appeared in the city, the security in the city became as good as before. As a large number of troops entered the city, some criminals who had not given up on making a fortune in the chaos had no choice but to put away their crooked thoughts. At this moment, it could be said that arching had returned to Yang Xie's embrace. Chenbo's condition gradually stabilized. After the army entered the city, he went straight to the city lord's mansion where Yang Chendong lived. When he saw Yang Chendong, who had taken off his golden cloak and changed into a loose green robe, Chenbo knelt on the ground with a plop. "Young master, I've made a mistake. I've failed to live up to your expectations. Get up quickly." Under Yang Chendong's gaze, Beta Persei, who came to report with him, quickly helped Chenbo up. "You haven't recovered yet. You still have to take care of your body. Have a seat." Yang Chendong asked with concern. Although the arching incident was lost because of Tang Sheng's rebellion, Chenbo, who was both the commander and the governor, also had an unshirkable leadership responsibility, as well as the responsibility of not knowing what was right and what was wrong. Of course, one of the fuses that caused the incident was the mistake in his strategy of governing the city. Why did Tang Sheng rebel? Wasn't it because his people were not allowed to enter the city? This policy was set by Chenbo. On the other hand, even if Tang Sheng didn't rebel this time, as time passed, more and more problems would accumulate. And when the contradiction became bigger and bigger, things would still happen. This was equivalent to a pustule in a person's body. If it was left alone, it would get bigger and bigger. It was better to squeeze it out and make it healthier. Chun Bo, who was sitting in the chair, had a guilty look on his face. In the past few years, the Far Eastern province had received a lot of supplies from Wuxia. In comparison, although there were some achievements, they were not very big. The rebellion this time was equivalent to erasing all of the previous achievements. He was even prepared to be removed from his position, or even convicted. Even though Chun Bo was sitting on a chair, he still lowered his head as if he was in the wrong. Seeing this, Yang Chendong shook his head and said, "Chun Bo, you can be considered an old man who has been following me for a long time. Back then, when you and Wuxia cooperated, you had such great chemistry. No matter what mission was given to you, you could complete it very well. This young master also has high hopes for you." Wu Sheng was sent to the Golden Horde for several years. He has successfully established a cooperative relationship with some important figures in the Russian tribe, and built his own new Xia city. His actions are gratifying. As for you, this young master also has high hopes for you. I gave you the power of the governor and the commander of the Far Eastern province. You have done well, so you don't have to worry that this young master will punish you. You are innocent. In order to dispel Chun Bo's worries and psychological burdens, Yang Chendong directly settled the matter. After saying that he was innocent, even if someone wanted to impeach or blame Chun Bo, it would be useless. Yang Chendong's words were like nails on a board. In Chun Bo's ears, he was very excited. "Thank you, sixth young master, for your affirmation of my work. But Tang Sheng was promoted by me. If something happens to him, I am guilty. I ask that I resign from the position of commander of the Far Eastern Army. Sixth young master, please accept my resignation." Looking at Chun Bo's stubbornness, Yang Chendong was angry and said, "This young master said that you are innocent. If you are guilty, you are just not open-minded enough. It's just a mistake caused by inexperience. It's nothing. No. The rebellion has happened. Someone has to stand up and take responsibility. This subordinate is willing to resign from the position of commander." Chun Bo's second resignation showed his determination. Meritorious service should be rewarded. Mistakes should be punished. The matter of the Far Eastern province was not a small matter. Who knew how many people were watching? If there was no explanation, then the law would be in chaos. Yang Chendong said, "Good. Since it's like this, then you will be relieved of your position as commander of the Far Eastern Army. You should focus on your work as the governor." "Thank you, sixth young master." Chun Bo, who got what he wanted, quickly cupped his fists in gratitude. He did not want to break the rules because of himself. With Yang Chendong's guarantee, no one would find trouble with him. However, there was no guarantee that no one would find trouble with the sixth young master. As far as he knew, there were many people in Crimson City who dared to speak up. Now that he was relieved of his position as commander of the Far Eastern Army, it was the same as giving everyone an explanation. He could also focus on his work as the governor. After staying here for a few years, in the beginning, he had some complaints about being transferred to this godforsaken place. But over the years he had watched Al City grow from nothing, and he had developed feelings for it. If he were to transfer him away now, he would be reluctant to do so. More importantly, Yang Chendong came here. With his ability to turn something rotten into something magical, he would have a bright future in the Far Eastern province. He really wanted to follow the sixth young master and do a good job. After being relieved of his position as commander, Chun Bo seemed to be a lot more relaxed in an instant. When he talked about work, his state of mind was a lot more energetic than before. Sixth young master, although Tang Sheng's selfishness caused the mutiny this time, the fact that so many people were willing to follow him to rebel against the Far Eastern Army is enough to show that our work is not up to par. The main thing is that Al City is still too small. Arranging for 500,000 people from all over the place is already a lot of pressure. We really can't arrange for other soldiers, clansmen, even for senior officers like division commanders. Some openings cannot be opened. Chapter 1394. Yang Chendong stood at the side and listened attentively. From time to time, he would nod his head to show that he understood Chen Bo's previous actions. When the other party was almost done, he asked, "Previously, I asked the Far Eastern Army to reclaim the wasteland. How is it going?" Speaking of wasteland, Chen Bo immediately perked up. "Sixth young master, according to your instructions, this is what we've been doing during this period of time. With the efforts of 500,000 people, we've reclaimed a total of 20 million mu of land in the past 5 years. The land here is really fertile. Although it's affected by the weather and can't be compared to the south of the Great Ming Dynasty where we can harvest twice or even thrice a year, the yield of crops here is very high and the taste of the crops is also very fragrant." The Far Eastern region had black soil and was very suitable for planting crops. Just like in the future, the 3 eastern provinces became the base for producing crops because of this reason. Hearing that 20 million mu of land had already been reclaimed, Yang Chendong nodded heavily. "Not bad, your work is still very effective." Finally being praised, Chen Bo's expression became a little better. At least he wasn't completely useless. At least he didn't let down the work he had done for the past few years. Right this time, the Mongolian cavalry suddenly appeared. Has the food been hidden properly? Yang Chendong suddenly thought of a very important question. Next, he wanted to develop the Far Eastern region. This wasn't just because of the bet he made with Yumian. Most importantly, this was an important chess piece for him to enter Europe through the land route. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Therefore, he decided to personally set up the troops here to establish a solid bridge to enter Europe. It's all hidden. Only the commanders and I of the Guard Regiment know the location. Even the other commanders don't know. You know that the soldiers of the Guard Regiment are all Han Chinese. Most of them are youths from Crimson City. Some of them are from the Cold Front. They are all trustworthy. This time the food is intact. This is enough to prove everything. Good, this matter is well done. If one wanted to develop a place, they had to solve the problem of their stomachs first. If one couldn't even fill their stomachs, how could they talk about development? How about this? Take out all the food. Next, whether it is building a city or repairing roads, we will need a lot of able-bodied men, and able-bodied men can eat the most. Hearing that the food was fine, Yang Chendong breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, he felt more confident. Build a city? Chen Bo was stunned. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. Yang Chendong smiled and nodded. That's right. If we want to develop the Far Eastern region, just one city isn't enough. These 2 days, I also looked at the terrain here. Although the city can still be expanded, it's very limited due to geographical reasons. Since that's the case, it's better to build a few more cities. Only in this way can we arrange more people in the city and solve the worries of the soldiers. Only with a unified mindset can we be motivated and quickly develop the Far Eastern region, so that this place can finally reach a state of self-sufficiency. After saying this, Yang Chendong seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and said, "Chen Bo, the importance of the Far Eastern region is far more important than you think. In the future, this place will become an important strategic location like Biani City. In the future, if we expand from here to the west, it's definitely impossible to rely on external logistical support. Therefore, building a strong logistical foundation here is the most important thing right now. It can be said that the prosperity of the Far Eastern region is directly related to how big the blades of the 5-star army can expand in the future." Hearing that the Far Eastern region was so important, Chen Bo was shocked. He originally thought that Yang Chendong had his eyes on this place because it was sparsely populated and could become a new granary for Yang Xia. Therefore, he put all his focus on reclaiming wastelands. But now, after hearing this idea, he realized that his vision was still too limited, and his thinking was too petty. Yang Chendong saw Chen Bo's shocked expression and understood. He sighed again and said, "Calculating the time, Wuxia has been in the Golden Horde for 7 years. The reason why he hasn't been transferred back is to wait for the right time to let him, this chess piece, display his greatest power. And if we only manage the territory in the Far East, then wouldn't his efforts over the past few years have been in vain?" I see. Chen Bo finally understood that the construction and development of the Far Eastern region wasn't done on a whim by the 6th young master. It was planned as early as 7 years ago, or even earlier. Yang Chendong felt that there were some things that could be said more seriously today. So he looked at Chenbo and asked with a serious expression. Chenbo, the 5-star army's territory is already big enough, so why are we still expanding? I'm sure the people below must have a lot of opinions about this. Chenbo didn't want to talk at first, but looking at Yang Chendong's serious expression, he could only bite the bullet and say, the people below have some opinions. But it's not the majority. There are still more people who like to work with the 6th young master. Especially some young people. They still want to build military achievements and are afraid that there won't be any more wars to fight. Wouldn't their years of training be useless in the end? Hehe. Yang Chendong laughed when he heard Chenbo's explanation. Young people wanted to build their careers, so they naturally wanted to participate in wars. Only then would they have a chance. But other than them, there were probably more people who didn't want to continue fighting. After all, peace was what everyone wanted. Other than a few extreme people, no one wanted war to happen. If it was possible, why would Yang Chendong want to start a war? He wanted to be with his wife and children, and it would be great to have a family reunion. But reality didn't allow him to do so. This was because he wasn't sure how long Yangxie could maintain her glory. In history, the Great Ming Dynasty was the center of the world. Other than the land of the Great Ming Dynasty, the other places were just barren lands. The things of the Great Ming Dynasty were the best, and the people of the Great Ming Dynasty were the most advanced race. Then the 2 Opium Wars completely woke the Chinese people up. It turned out that we weren't the most advanced. It turned out that the Europeans had almost robbed the whole world. It turned out that we were already far behind. Then what were we doing? Didn't we know? We knew. Since the Tang Dynasty, China had been the center of the world. During the Song Dynasty, the southeast coast was full of Arab merchant ships. At that time, the Song Dynasty had begun to transform from a primitive natural economy to a market economy. It was even more so during the Zhou Ming Dynasty. When Zheng He went to the Western Ocean, who didn't admire him? Many countries were proud to be able to pay tribute to the Great Ming Dynasty. But that was it. When the Great Ming Dynasty entered the Yingzong Dynasty, it was equivalent to entering the middle of the Ming Dynasty. After that, it was a downward slope. In the end, it was covered by history and was ruled by a group of Tatars who only had millions of people. How sad it was to think about it. If Yang Chendong stopped now, he couldn't guarantee that his descendants wouldn't be destroyed one day, and they wouldn't be ruled by other foreign races. In order for that day to not appear, he had to work harder now. For example, when the world was unified and the Han people became the rulers, even if his descendants failed to live up to expectations and lost the world, the people who could replace them would definitely be Han people. It could be considered as meat rotting in a pot. Not many people could understand his thoughts because they had never experienced it before, so they couldn't think of it. Yang Chendong was different. History had already told him everything. When he was young, he had thought that if one day he had the ability, he would definitely let those foreign races know that the nobility of the Han people was not to be blasphemed. He would also not forgive those people for their actions. He could not forgive the foreign races for invading China when it was declining. He could not forgive the tolerance of China for being used as an opportunity for them to make a comeback. He couldn't forgive them for leaving behind a mess every time they came and left. He could not forgive their betrayal, their despicable actions that were worse than pigs and dogs. As early as the era of Confucius, Zhou Han was forced to the brink of destruction by the warhounds. The western capital Chang fell and King Ping moved the capital to Luoyang, barely surviving the crisis. It was in that year that countless Chinese women were humiliated by the barbarians. Their blood was stained with tears and their corpses were a warning to us. Warning us not to be merciful to the foreign races. The results of the Spring and Autumn War, taking advantage of the internal divisions of China, the Xiongnu flourished and led the barbarians to invade China. They burned, killed, and plundered, committing all kinds of crimes. This blood debt had been settled for many years, so it was time to settle it. And this settlement work would be completed by him. As for those who said that he was militaristic, that he killed people like Scything Flax, that he ostracized the foreign races, that he didn't have the magnanimity of a large country, that he didn't have a broad mind, that was up to them. Yang Chendong had his own principles, and now that he had the ability, he had to do everything he wanted to do. He had to do it to the best of his ability, to the extreme. Chen Bo left in the end. He was removed from his position as the commander of the Far Eastern Army, but there was no bitterness on his face. On the contrary, he was excited by Yang Chendong's words about developing the Far Eastern region, because this proved that his time had come. 2 days later, Tian Hu won the battle and brought the captive Mongolian cavalry and Belinsky's caravan to Al City. Chen Bo knew about Belinsky. This person had a good head for business, and his business was very big. In the past Al City, he could be considered one of the top merchants. Of course, he would not forget that it was this person who instigated the 4th Division's commander, Tang Sheng, to attack the Far Eastern Army. Now that he heard that this person had been captured, he quickly went to find Yang Chendong. He wanted this person to die and take revenge for the thousands of soldiers who had sacrificed themselves. Chapter 1395. When Chen Bo arrived at the governor's mansion, he saw Belinsky standing in the reception hall, meeting with Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong sat high above and looked at Belinsky with great interest. He was the only one standing in the middle of the field. On his left was Beta Persei, and below him were Tian Hu, the 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Taimu as well as the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Dai Qua and the others. After Chen Bo arrived, Dai Qua and the others immediately greeted him. Then he stood together with them and listened to Belinsky, who was standing in the center of the room, speak with fervor and assurance. This Belinsky was quite capable. In terms of language, he could speak Chinese, Russian, and Mongolian dialects. At this moment he was speaking very fluent Chinese, which did not sound awkward, about some of the strange stories in Siberia and some of the things he had encountered in the mountains. Belinsky's face was very calm, and he even introduced himself proudly. King Wunan of Damyang, this humble one's home is in Siberia, and I've seen many Mongolian troops burning and looting everywhere. They're a group of bandits, and they only know how to snatch good things. Of course, in their eyes, anything that is useful is a good thing. They really look like they haven't seen the world. When he was working with the Mongolian army, his words were full of flattery. He said things like the Mongolian army was the strongest army in the world, and the Mongolians were the noblest people in the world. However, when it came to belittling them, he did not give them any face at all. Those who did not know would think that he had a deep grudge with the Mongolian army. In fact, in the entire Siberia, Hulihin is not the only Mongolian cavalry. As far as this humble one knows, there are 7 or 8 other forces of different sizes. The only difference is that compared to Hulihin, they're poorer and weaker. Apart from that, there are also a few native Russian tribes. Some of them have become quite powerful and have their own protection teams. If it weren't for the fact that they lack weapons and battle experience, they wouldn't be much weaker than the Mongolian cavalry in terms of numbers. Respected King Wunan of Damyang, this humble one can contact these people, and we've done business with them in the past, so we have some friendship. As long as you give the order, this humble one can bring your greetings to them. I'm sure that at that time, everyone can form an alliance to deal with the Mongolian cavalry. Honorable King Wunan of the Great Ming Dynasty, this lowly one has traveled to various places as a merchant. I am very clear about where there are small paths and where there is a main road through which an army can march. If your majesty needs, this lowly one can present a self-drawn map at any time. It will certainly play a big role in your majesty's control of the situation there in the future. Respected King Wunan of Damyang, this humble one. Belinsky was like a long-tongued woman who didn't know what fatigue was. He kept his mouth open for more than an hour, to the point that his saliva was flying everywhere, and his lips were starting to crack. Finally, he shut his mouth. Perhaps there were still some things that he hadn't said, but based on his experience, he had already said a lot. This was enough to please this young bugnam of Gojoseon. As for taking out everything in his heart, only a fool would do such a thing. Since the two of them were working together, he had to keep some trump cards. Otherwise, how could he fight for the initiative in the future? Seeing that Belinsky had finally shut his mouth, Yang Chendong smiled and nodded with satisfaction. Then he looked at Ba Daojiang and said, "Take him away. He's tired. Don't let him talk too much. Let him draw out the map of Siberia that he knows." "Yes," Ba Daojiang replied. He had already seen the meaning in Yang Chendong's eyes. He had to properly entertain this foreign profiteer and dig out all the things in his head. At the very least, he had to make sure that he wouldn't cooperate. Under all kinds of torture, he wasn't worried that he wouldn't open his mouth. Ba Daojiang agreed, but Belinsky didn't understand. He raised his right hand and shouted, "Wait, respected King Wunan of Damyang. You haven't said how we should cooperate." "Cooperate? Why should we cooperate?" Yang Chendong laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. "You don't want to cooperate? If you don't cooperate, why should I draw a map for you?" A trace of panic appeared on Belinsky's face. When he was talking about himself, he didn't say where he came from, but I. Perhaps this was his true thought. In his heart, he did not respect Yang Chendong that much. It was only because the situation was not as good as Yang Chendong that he had to say this. "You know how to draw a map." Seeing that Belinsky still wanted to make a fair deal with him at this time, Yang Chendong laughed loudly. He was confident that after Ba Daojiang made his move, the other party would soon know why the flowers were so red. At that time, he would say what he knew, and those who didn't, he would talk nonsense. Yang Chendong's eyes revealed a look of disdain. He was treating Belinsky as a captive, which made the merchant unable to remain calm. He was originally a little flustered, but now he shouted, "No, you can't treat me like this. I'm here to discuss business with you. If you do this, it will make me disappointed." "Wrong, you're not here to discuss business with this king. You're this king's captive. You were captured by Commander Tian Hu. Everyone can testify to this." Yang Chendong couldn't allow the other party to slander the reputation of the five-star army. Although they killed people like flies, they still had their reputation. He would still keep his word to his friends. Belinsky suddenly remembered that he was indeed brought here by Tian Hu. Although he chose not to resist the five-star army's cavalry, and even wanted to use the opportunity to meet Yang Chendong to prove his ability and practical value. However, it was also true that he was a captive. From the looks of it, he had miscalculated. He couldn't use his status as a captive as an excuse. He rolled his eyes and shouted again, "I'm a big merchant of the Russian tribe. I have many powerful friends in Siberia. If Bugnam of Gojoseon wants to harm me, do you think it will anger them? Once they join forces with the powerful Mongolian cavalry, I'm afraid Arching will change hands a second time." Belinsky's face was full of threat as he spoke. He was just short of saying, "Uncle B is very angry, and the consequences will be very serious." "Are you threatening me?" Yang Chendong was stunned at first, and then he looked up to the sky and laughed. The other high-ranking officers of the five-star army in the other halls couldn't help but laugh out loud as if they had heard the funniest joke in the world. Belinsky blushed as he looked at everyone. Although he didn't know what he had said wrong, he knew that these people were looking down on him when he saw how they were laughing. He thought that if he didn't argue now, he would be captured by the ferocious five-star army. His life would be worse than death, so he needed to save himself. Just as everyone was laughing, he suddenly shouted, "Don't think that I'm joking. Let me tell you, many tribes are still waiting for me to do business with them. Without me, they won't have a trade route. They will get angry and become enemies with you. How about this? Let me go immediately, and I'm willing to donate all my wealth. I will go back and tell those tribes that the five-star army is friendly, and that Bugnam of Gojoseon is great. I guarantee that they won't have any ideas about you." It was half a threat and half a plea. When things didn't develop as he expected, Belinsky really panicked. He was afraid of death because he had money. He was more afraid of death than anyone else. When he realized that money couldn't save his life or bring him glory, his heart was in a mess. "Oh, you still want to continue trading with those people? Do they have money?" Yang Chendong finally asked with interest. His efforts didn't go to waste. Belinsky wasn't afraid of being asked questions, but he was afraid that the other party would ignore him. He immediately became spirited and said, "Respected Bugnam of Gojoseon, although they don't have money, they have things that we can trade with. For example, they live in the mountains all year round, So they have good tiger skin, tiger bones, tiger penis, tiger meat, ginseng, and all kinds of animal fur. They are all good things and are very valuable outside. Oh, they have good things, so it's worth it to trade with them. Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. Then his gaze fell on Belinsky and said, "But you don't have to make such a trade. Our Yangxia has many excellent merchants. You just need to tell us the locations of those tribes. As for your assets, they were seized and will definitely be confiscated. Also, you colluded with Tang Sheng and the others to destroy our arching and kill this king's people. This debt needs to be settled. All right, take him away and treat him well. Make him spit out everything in his stomach. If he doesn't say anything, just kill him." Yang Chendong waved his hand impatiently. Ba Daojiang, who had been waiting at the side, strode forward and lifted Belinsky, who weighed more than 50 kilograms, out of the hall. Even after they left the hall, Belinsky was still screaming like a pig being slaughtered. "You can't do this to me. Otherwise, you'll definitely attract the anger of the other tribes. You'll definitely regret it." No one took Belinsky's threat seriously. Regardless of whether it was the Mongol or Russian soldiers, if they didn't come, why would the 5-star army look for them? If they surrendered, everything would be fine. Those who were guilty would be punished, and those who weren't would be given land to farm. They would be squeezed dry. Chapter 1396. Thank you to Moral Student 609, Ji Pingon, and Blazing Flame for their monthly votes. Thank you to Longzi. Over the years, who had the 5-star army feared on the battlefield? After Belinsky was taken away, the hall became much quieter. However, seeing the excitement on the faces of Chun Bo and the others, it was clear that they were happy to treat someone who had brought disaster to the Far Eastern Army like this. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Chendong also decided to talk about the problems of merchants. Before, the Far Eastern province had been busy with two things. One was building a city, and the other was reclaiming land. As for the matter of merchants, it had been ignored. This was not to say that merchants were not important, but before they had a place to live and food to fill their stomachs, who would have time to do business? With a light cough, Yang Chendong shifted everyone's attention to himself. He said, "Without agriculture, there is no stability, and without merchants, there is no wealth." This king does not need to say more, everyone knows this. If the Far Eastern province wants to become powerful, it cannot avoid using trade routes. Later, this king will send a telegram to encourage some Yangxia merchants to come and develop here. When the time comes, everyone will have to cooperate. Understood? Yes. Yang Chendong's words were equivalent to an order. Everyone nodded in agreement. In this era, merchants were not looked down upon. They were seen as people who reaped without sowing. Unscrupulous merchants were what people generally thought of them. Yang Chendong did not agree with this point of view. It was too arbitrary to say that merchants were lowly based on the fact that they only cared about profits. Wasn't it said that all merchants in the world came for profits, and all merchants went for profits? Back in the pre-Qin era, people had this understanding. Why did everyone still think that only merchants cared about profits? In his opinion, it was not merchants who cared about profits, but everyone in the world. It was necessary to allow, prevent, guide, restrict, and use at the same time. Just like you the great controlling the flood, it was better to guide it than to block it. We can develop commerce, we can develop industry, we can liberate the productive forces, we can liberate the mind and everything that can be liberated. Yangxia cannot do without commerce, and even more so cannot take commerce lightly. On the contrary, commerce and agriculture should be placed on the same level of importance. The only difference was that it was based on agriculture and focused on commerce. For the places that we can't go for the time being, we can let the merchants be the vanguard. Through the merchants, we can control everything in those countries, and we can control everything in the merchants. Some people would think that capturing captives and serving the corvée is inhumane, not benevolent and righteous enough, and not enough to show the demeanor of Yangxia. In the face of these doubts, Yang Chendong threw them aside for the time being. Innovation meant that he had to go through a process from not understanding to understanding. In this process, he did not intend to listen to other people's opinions. In his mind, there were too many successful experiences of the later generations. He just needed to use them and did not need to prove them. Since that was the case, why would he need to listen to other people's opinions that were not correct? With the momentum of his own words, Yang Qindong passed the decision to develop the Far Eastern region in the future. This was the benefit of him building his own empire. If he believed that something was right, then there was no need to discuss it with others, and there was no need to listen to other people's opinions. Usually, only the founding emperor could enjoy this kind of treatment. Even in the second generation, it was difficult to do things so happily. From time to time, there would be people who would use the ancestral rules and regulations to stop the wise ruler from doing things that would benefit the people and the country. The matter of the merchants was put aside for now. When the real merchants came, Yang Qindong would have a good talk with them. Not only did he need the merchants to pay more taxes, he also needed to understand the situation of the various forces in Siberia through these merchants. He believed that they would definitely surprise him. After Belinsky was taken away, Yang Qindong got someone to bring over a sand table, while everyone was still around. He brought up the matter of building a city and building a road that he had discussed with Chun Bo. Pointing at the sand table, Yang Qindong said loudly, "Considering the Far Eastern region's vast territory and sparse population, it is impossible to completely control this place with just arching. This king has decided that apart from arching, we will first build 4 cities. They will be in Ding City in the northeast of Mount Alloy. That will become the core of the Far Eastern region's northeast. After the city is built, we will use it as a starting point to develop it. It can also become the granary of the Far Eastern region and provide all kinds of food. Build a Han city south of Arching, which is near the Stan of Mountains, Outer Xing'an Mountains. It will be a huge transit station that will be responsible for the future communication between the Far Eastern region and the Han. Build Tongbei City south of the Han City by the Irguna River, near the present Mo. It will be an important hub that connects the 3 eastern provinces. In the future, the resources sent from the Yangtze provinces will all pass through here. It will be more convenient and faster, and it will also reduce the losses on the road. Build Alei City west of Arching in the Upper Yansk Mountains. It will be the front line of the military, and constantly monitor the various weapons factions in Siberia. Once they have any intentions, it will become the western gate to prevent them from sending troops to the Far Eastern region. This will ensure the safety of the rear, and allow for peace of mind. After pointing at the 4 places, Yang Qindong put down the baton in his hand, and looked at everyone present. Choosing these 4 places wasn't just because of Yang Qindong's whim. It was a combination of distance, geographical location, mineral resources, water sources, and whether the surrounding land was flat or not. It was based on the development of the Far Eastern region in the future. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if there was a fake beast, it would be impossible to find a more suitable place. No objections. Everyone shook their heads and said. Among them, except for Chun Bo who had experience in governing a place, the others were all generals. They only knew that wherever Yang Qindong pointed, they would fight there. Good, then it's decided. Yang Qindong also knew that talking too much about this topic was like playing the lute to a cow, so he simply decided to be direct. After choosing the location, it was time to arrange the manpower. During the Zhu Ming dynasty, there was no so-called industry, and technology was not developed. Many things needed a large number of people to complete. For a huge project like building a city, it was unknown how much labor was needed to complete it. For example, in the previous Al city, there were 500,000 Yangtze citizens and tens of thousands of Far Eastern Army soldiers in the city. It only took them a year to build the outline of the city. When the city had a scale, it was already a few years later. Labor was indispensable in building a city. The more the better. The great man Grandpa Mao once said that there was strength in numbers. This also explained why it was easier to do things with more people. Al City, which had just experienced a riot, now had a population that was 20% less than before. In other words, there were only about 400,000 citizens. Thus, it was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to complete the 4 new cities before the arrival of winter. At least at this time, Chunbo lowered his head and didn't say anything. He had experienced this kind of thing before, so he knew better than anyone how difficult it would be. On the other hand, the other generals didn't care. They believed in Yang Chendong. Since the sixth young master said that it could be built, it would definitely be built. As for what to do, it was still the same sentence. They only needed to do what he said. No one said anything. Yang Chendong didn't point to anyone to answer his question. He opened his mouth again and said, "Has the food been transported to the city?" This sentence was, of course, directed to Chenbo. Previously, he had hidden the food because he didn't have much confidence in the safety of Al City. But now that Yang Chendong was here, Chenbo naturally felt relieved. He didn't believe that there was anyone in the world who could take something away from the sixth young master. The food has been transported to the city. Now all the large granaries in the city are full. There are still many stored in the original cellars. Chenbo said with his chest puffed out and his head held high. This was the only thing he was proud of in the Far East for a few years. Good. The rest of the food doesn't need to be transported to the granaries in the city. Just divide it into 4 and send it to the other 4 cities. Yang Chendong nodded. With enough food, he had enough confidence to do things. Tianhu, when you go back, distribute the horse meat that died in these battles. You can also form a hunting team and go into the dense forests and deep mountains to hunt wild beasts. At the same time, you can also let people go down to fish. Remember, don't take the small fish. Even if you catch them, you have to put them back. If you want to catch, you have to catch the big fish. The next work will be very tiring. It won't be enough to just have food without meat. Yang Chendong looked at Tianhu, but these words were also for everyone to hear. As the saying goes, the emperor doesn't lack hungry soldiers. If you want a horse to run, you have to feed it grass. The horse's mane and tail had to be kept. They were strategic resources. The horse couldn't be wasted. Although it couldn't be made into leather armor, it was still better than nothing. The soldiers of the 5-star army couldn't use it, but it was still a hot commodity if sold to ordinary people. Horse meat was, of course, the most precious. It was shaved off from the bones and mixed with wine to detoxify it. The taste was very good. The bones of the horse couldn't be thrown away. They were thrown into the pot to make soup. It was one of the world's delicacies. Then the bones were smashed open. The bone marrow inside was so fragrant that it made people bite their tongue. The internal organs of the horse were also good things. The heart, liver, spleen, stomach, and kidneys could all be cooked together. The large intestines and small intestines were also one of the best ingredients. A pot of horse offal was also a famous dish. When the time came, coupled with the game obtained from hunting, the meat problem could basically be solved. This was the case for this year. However, they couldn't always use this method in the future. If they hunted more, the number of wild beasts would naturally decrease. If the fish were too small, they couldn't catch them. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to eat fish in the future. Since they had decided to develop in the long run, it was impossible to not have a long-term vision. The kind of fishing in a pond would only be done when there was no other way. Chapter 1397. After the food problem was solved, Yang Chendong's next speech revolved around 3 major points. First, build 4 cities to ensure that everyone could live in the cities and have their own houses to keep warm before the winter snowfall. Second, build roads. The roads between the 5 cities, including Arching, had to be built so that 3 carriages could pass side by side without congestion. Only in this way could they ensure the smooth flow of information, and ensure that if one side was in trouble, there would be reinforcements from all sides. Third, continue to cultivate wastelands. The commander of the new Second Army that followed Yang Chendong not only escorted a large amount of supplies and tens of thousands of soldiers, but also millions of Yangtze's people. The more people there were, the more food they needed. If there wasn't enough land, they wouldn't even be able to solve the problem of food and clothing. How could they talk about development? It should be mentioned here that the Zhu Ming dynasty still hadn't completely solved the problem of the people's bellies. This wasn't because they didn't work hard, but because the difference between the output of the land and the food that the people needed was too big. For example, in the current Great Ming dynasty, Other than potatoes, 1 mu of land could only produce a little more than 1 dan of grain per year. But how much grain could an ordinary young man eat in a year? A full 5 dan. In other words, 5 mu of land was needed to feed a young man. In this way, it would be strange if there wasn't enough grain to eat. Often, people would only be half full. This was also the reason why people at that time always looked sallow and emaciated. In contrast, the reason why Wuxia didn't lack grain was because the land was large enough. Compared to their small population, the proportion of land was still very high. Secondly, they had high-yield crops like potatoes, sweet potatoes, and corn. These crops could easily produce 7 to 8 dan, 10 dan, or even 20 dan of grain per year. The emergence of these crops greatly alleviated the problem of Wuxia's lack of grain. Not only that, they could also be sold to the outside world. This was all because they had a good foundation. In addition, Wuxia had built many greenhouses. Even in winter, there were still vegetables to eat. This made many Wuxia territories no longer have the concept of no vegetables in winter. Naturally, food was not a problem. Yang Chendong proposed 3 general directions and began to arrange the work. As the governor of the Far Eastern region, Chen Bo was naturally responsible for the construction of the 4 cities. Tian, whose 1st Cavalry Army, was responsible for the defense of the battlefront, hunting in the forest, and fishing in the water. In short, he was responsible for the supply of meat. The new 2nd Army's 1st Cavalry Army was responsible for the reclamation of the land and the construction of winter greenhouses. Yang Chendong would personally oversee the construction of the roads. He also wanted to take advantage of the time when the roads were being repaired to take a look at the mines and minerals in the area. He wanted to prepare the raw materials for the construction of the factories in the future. After the meeting, everyone received their tasks and began to get busy. At the same time, the first batch of laborers was brought to the 4 cities in batches. Chen Bo personally led them, and the Far Eastern Army soldiers were responsible for escorting them to the 4 cities. These laborers were mainly Mongolian captives. Other than that, there were also soldiers from the Far Eastern Army's 4th Cavalry Division. They had followed Tang Sheng onto the wrong path, and now it was time for them to redeem themselves. There were also people like Qi Wu, Zhang Mian, and Li Dei who had joined Tang Sheng later on. It must be said that they had been wronged. They had made the wrong choice at the last moment, and now they had become criminals. They needed to serve in the military and return to their original identities. Other than these laborers, Yang Chendong also allowed the people of the Far Eastern region and the various tribes to participate. As long as they worked, whether it was building cities, repairing roads, or reclaiming land, they would receive corresponding rewards. After that, they would use the Chinese currency printed by Wuxia to buy food and daily necessities from the 5 cities. These people could also apply to join the Yang faction, but they needed to apply in advance. After that, their performance would depend on their performance. If they proved that there were no problems within 3 months to half a year, they would be issued a special identity certificate issued by the Yang faction. With this certificate, they would be considered good citizens. Mobilizing the people and making them work for one's own use. This was the successful experience of the later generations. However, it was still a first, and once the news came out, it attracted a lot of discussion and influence. As long as the people lived under the leadership of any faction, they would need to serve in the military. It's free labor, just because it's your job. If they did not perform well during this period, they would be scolded and beaten. This was regarded as a matter of course by the people. In the Wuxia faction, not only was this exempted, but if you were willing to work, you could also receive a high wage. Some people calculated that if 2 people in a family of 5 were willing to work to earn wages, then they would be able to support the family and ensure that the 5 of them would not starve. If 3 people were willing to work, then they would be able to eat their fill and wear warm clothes. Although it was still far from a well-off life, it was still considered an ordinary family. At the end of the year, there would still be some savings. Therefore, when this policy began to spread, especially by the local people like Nikolai who supported the 5-star army, more and more Russian people who were hiding in the mountains began to come out and rush to the nearest Wuxia city. Never underestimate the power of the people. especially under Yang Qindong's proposal. All the labor paid would not be calculated by the day, nor by the month, but by the value of the labor. In other words, the people who could work would earn more, and the people who could not work would earn less. A contract responsibility system was implemented. In this way, the enthusiasm of the people was greatly aroused. Not only did the people earn more money and live a better life, but it also increased the speed of the construction of the 4 cities and the development of the wasteland. When Chunbo heard the progress of the work from his subordinates, he was stunned. If this method could have been used during the construction of Arl City, the city would have been a completely different sight now. Of course, this was just Chunbo's imagination. Some of the innovations were not something he could think of. He did not have Yang Qindong's influence, nor did he have his decisiveness. If the same thing was done by him, when some of the policies were implemented, it would inevitably lead to all kinds of discussions and doubts. In short, the reforms were not something that could be changed by just anyone. It also depended on the specific strength of the person who implemented it. Half a month later, the commander of the mercenary corps finally arrived at Al City. Not only did they bring 1 million Yangxie people with them, but they also brought all kinds of rare materials. For example, explosives to blow up mountains, cement to pave roads, and so on. At this point, the entire Far Eastern region fell into a heated atmosphere. Everyone's faces were filled with hope for the future. Facts also proved that there were no lazy people in the world. When they felt that the effort and the reward were proportional, everyone would unconsciously unleash their potential and do everything well. When small things were done, they would become big things when put together. The development of the Far Eastern region entered the fast lane. It was even faster than Yang Qindong imagined. Not only did the people of the Far Eastern region respond positively, but the tribes hiding in the mountains also came out. Even the people of Siberia who heard the news crossed thousands of mountains and rivers to come here. They wanted to have something to eat, to not be frozen in winter, and to have a safe haven. Yang Qindong adopted a reward system for these foreign people who came because of the reputation. Those who came first could only be slaves. After that, they had to work hard and contribute enough to become commoners. In the end, they could get rid of their temporary identity card and get an official identity card of an ordinary citizen. If there were people who performed well, they could be promoted to Han citizen. One of the reward systems was that they could report people who were doing bad things. This way, they could find all suspicious people through supervision, and there would not be any loopholes. At the same time, if they were serious about their work, they could often exceed the quota and lead others to do better. They would be seen as role models. Also, if they were to spread rumors, they could attract more people to be used by the 5-star army. These were all meritorious deeds that were of great help to the evaluation. With the perfection of the system and mutual supervision, many people with unknown identities were quickly found out. After the investigation by the Security Bureau, they found that most of them were spies from the Mongolian army and belonged to various forces. There were also a few spies from the large Russian tribes. They doubted the authenticity of the 5-star army building a city in Dali and sent people over to investigate. For such people, Yang Qindong ordered his men to release them. He even asked his men to show them around the cities so that they could have a better understanding of what the 5-star army was doing. This would make it easier for them to make the right choice. What made people not know whether to laugh or cry was that there were spies from Baiming and Southern Ming among these people. It was really difficult for them to come here from thousands of miles away just to see what the 5-star army was doing. When Beta Persei reported the discovery of spies from the Great Ming dynasty to Yang Qindong, he could not help but sigh. It seems that both Baiming and Southern Ming have already seen me as a great enemy. Forget it, it won't be long before I deal with them anyway. I'll just detain these spies. If they're willing to stay, I'll arrange jobs for them and see what happens. As for those who refuse to change, I'll just kill them. Yang Qindong did not boast that he was a saint. He would never be soft-hearted towards his enemies. If he did not do so, he would not be able to achieve the great goal of the world and the supremacy of the Han people. Chapter 1398. Thank you, Moral Student 609, Yuan Zinan's monthly votes and rewards. Longzi thanks you. The work in the Far East region was in full swing. The results were much faster than the original plan, and all the work was progressing at a high speed. Compared to the changes in the Far East region, under the leadership of Tiger's Man and Yumian, the mining work had already started after spring. Because they had already investigated and knew the approximate location of the mines, the mining work went very smoothly. A large amount of the resources needed by the Yangxia were mined. Other than a portion left in the first city, the rest were sent to Qiqian City for effective use. The battle in the Li region also achieved some results. The most important thing was taking down Yi Erqiang's tribe. The newly established New Five armies had also received a public call from Yang Qindong to praise them. The first army led by Bai Shuang also turned a small victory into a big victory in the Li region. After Prime Minister Ali Pu was captured by the intelligence department of the Five-Star Army, King Baolide felt that he couldn't do anything by himself. In the end, he made a difficult choice. He submitted to the Timur Empire, which was far away from them, and requested for them to send troops to help him. The actions of the Five-Star Army had already attracted the attention of the Timur Empire, especially after the new Five-Star Army took down the Yirqiang tribe and sent troops to the Yusang region. Although they hadn't really fought, from the direction of the troops, a huge battle was unavoidable. Without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. Even if it was to ensure his own safety, the Timur Empire couldn't watch the Five-Star Army grow stronger. At this moment, the actions of the Five-Star Army were very similar to their ancestors. Genghis Khan and his descendants attacked and occupied one after another. In the end, the land was so big that people didn't dare to look at it directly. Their territory spanned from the Irtysh River in the west to the Sea of Okhotsk in the east. In the east, they owned the northeastern part of the Korean peninsula. In the southwest, they included the Kashmir region, Bhutan, Sikkim, and other places in the southern foot of the Himalayas, northeastern Myanmar and northern Thailand. They swept through Russia and Ukraine, reaching Kiev, the current capital of Ukraine, and the Danube River. They destroyed the Germanic army in Hungary, and forced their way to Venice in Italy. It had a land area of 44 million square kilometers. The performance of the Five-Star Army led by Yang Qindong was even better. No one was willing to see such a huge monster appear. It could be imagined that it wouldn't take long for the Timur Empire to make a move. As for whether they would send an emissary to dissuade them or directly dispatch troops, that would depend on the development of the battlefield. Let's talk about the navy. Since they went to sea in March, they have been invincible all the way. The battleships were equipped with the most advanced cannons. In addition, the new ships were much faster than the ships of other forces. The Cold Front Navy was almost invincible. In just 2 months, they had conquered Sumatra in the south and Manchuria in the north, completing the task of controlling the Straits of Malacca. Following which, they headed straight for Sri Lanka, following the route that Zheng He took when he went to the Western Ocean. The difference was that the Cold Front Navy was much more ferocious. Wherever they went, there was either submission or death. There was no third choice. The situation was very good. Yang Qindong, who was in the Far East, was relieved and wholeheartedly directed the road construction. With Beta Persei, an all-round deputy, Yang Qindong only needed to take care of the general situation. This also gave him more time to look for various minerals. There were some maps in the warehouse that recorded the relevant information. With this, he had already led people to find 3 large mines. Conservatively, one of the iron mines could meet the needs of the Far East for the next 30 years. The rest could also be used to support the armament factory in Qiqian City. When the news was sent back to Qiqian City, several teams of experts quickly set out. The current armament factory was developing very quickly, resulting in a shortage of resources. If they could really solve the problem of raw materials, it could be imagined that the development of the armament factory would soon reach a new level. Time passed month by month. In the 9th month of 1461 AD, good news kept coming. In the 9th month, the 6th Madam, Luan Xiaoyu, gave birth to Yang Qindong's second son. In the 10th month, Xiao Yuxue gave birth to a son named Yang Jun. A few days later, Dong Xiangxiang gave birth to a daughter named Yang Nua. In the 11th month, Tuoya gave birth to a daughter named Yang Ting. Not long after, Sumaner gave birth to a son named Yang Zhao. In the 12th month, another 2,000 gold pieces were added. They were the pure daughter Yang Xian at the beginning of the month, and Huyan's daughter Yang Lin at the end of the year. That's right, the year 1461 was considered a bumper harvest year. This bumper harvest did not only refer to the great progress in various aspects of military and local politics, but also the expansion of the royal family. In 3 months, there were 3 more men and 4 more women. It had to be said that Yang Qindong's ability was very good. After staying in Qiqian City for a few months and working hard, there was finally a return. The only regret was that Yang Qindong could not rush back. At this time, it was snowing heavily in the Far East. The 4 newly built cities could finally be put to use. Although the city walls had been built in a short period of time, the number of houses in the cities was still a little low. Yang Qindong had no choice but to take out the auditorium that was built first. Although it was a little crowded and noisy, the floor of the auditorium was still warm, which brought a sense of joy to all the foreign people who were temporarily staying here. Since young, they had never stayed in such a warm room before. They didn't even dare to think about it. But now everything had come true. It was no wonder that everyone was so excited. Even when they were squeezed together, no one had any complaints. Including Al City, the appearance of a total of 5 cities brought a ray of warmth to the Far East in the cold winter. After the families of all the soldiers were properly settled, there were no other voices in the army. Especially after Yang Qindong brought up the slogan of making a new contribution, in order to change himself and his family's living conditions. All the soldiers were thinking about one thing, and that was when they could go to war, when they could go to the battlefield, and let them have the opportunity to make contributions and receive rewards. Their fighting spirit was brewing, and they were only waiting for a suitable opportunity to release it. At that time, the fighting spirit of the 5-star army would be unstoppable. The cold winter would pass, and spring would come. At the same time, it brought news from Yang Xie's caravan. The map of the Mongolian army in Siberia had been sent to Yang Qindong. Looking at the 2 cities of Ust Kilima and Greater Ust Koj, Yang Qindong's calm eyes flashed with fighting spirit. After finally finding the 2 main forces of the Mongolian army, Yang Qindong's fist landed on the table. Beta Persei, summon General Tian Hu and General Sherbei for a discussion. 1462 AD, end of the 3rd month. The snow had just started to melt, and white snow could still be seen everywhere. The 5-star army had already gathered in Alii City. Soon after, under the command of General Yang Qindong, nearly 100,000 soldiers set off. They brought enough rations and equipment as they left the city. They wanted to make a name for themselves. After hearing the news that the 5-star army had already set off, many of the foreign race youths who stayed in the 5 cities had yearning, envy, and unshakable determination in their eyes. The treatment of the soldiers of the 5-star army was something that they had witnessed during this period of time. Excellent equipment, generous treatment, lofty status, respected social status. All of these were things that made people jealous and envious. They had also joined the army. In the past, they had worked hard for their tribe, and some had worked hard for the Mongolian army. However, that was because they did not have enough food to eat or warm clothes to wear. How could it be compared to working for the 5-star army? The difference in status and treatment caused the 5-star army soldiers to be filled with a sense of honor, and they were filled with the spirit of a master. One could imagine the spirit and fighting ability of this kind of army. It was not something that the Mongolian soldiers who were just trying to make a living could compare to. This kind of army was naturally very attractive. Regretfully, slaves did not have the right to sign up for the 5-star army. At the very least, they had to be commoners. If there were many people signing up, they would need to be commoners. Just like that, many of the slaves who had just joined Yang Xie not long ago lost the chance to join the army. Thinking about the treatment of the 5-star army soldiers and the delicious rice and food that they would occasionally help out in the army, one of the slaves could not help but drool. At the same time, he made up his mind to perform well and become a commoner as soon as possible. This way, he would have a chance to join the 5-star army in the next recruitment. Reward system, good treatment, and social status. These were the changes that Yang Qindong had made to the military system. In a subtle way, it solved the problem of the lack of soldiers. Compared to the other factions who moved for the king and shut up for the country, it was much more practical. Everyone had their own selfish motives. When they were respected and their lives were greatly improved, perhaps they would have more thoughts and their realms would increase. However, if someone did not even have enough food to eat or warm clothes to wear, what was the difference between saying loyalty to the king and serving the country? Even if they said these things, how much could they agree with it in their hearts? If they did not agree, how could they be proactive? Thinking about it, one was to be forced to go to war, and the other was to want to make military contributions and perform well on the battlefield. If these two armies met, what would the result be? Even an idiot would be able to guess who would win and who would lose. Yang Chendong brought the 5-star army with strong fighting spirit and left the Far East region, bringing the envy and yearning of countless people into Siberia. At the end of March, due to the geographical location of Siberia, the weather in Siberia was not as warm as in the south. It was only warm around noon when there was plenty of sunshine. At other times, especially at night, it was still very cold. As the snow melted, the roads became muddy and difficult to walk on. Chapter 1399. Any other army would not have chosen to set out at such a time. The damage to themselves would be far too severe. But for the 5-star army, the effect was very ordinary. Once the soldiers got used to this method of marching and got used to the environment and weather, it only took them 2 days to recover. Although their boots would still kick up mud when they stepped on the road, it no longer hindered their advance. Unlike the people of that time who liked to wear cloth shoes, those who were better off would wear leather boots, those who were worse off would wear straw sandals, and even those who were poor would go barefoot. The soldiers of the 5-star army all wore leather boots that were the same size, allowing them to protect their feet to the greatest extent when they were marching, allowing them to walk in the forest full of boulders without suffering any injuries. Every soldier was given a standard sleeping bag, a water bottle, a wash basin, a bedding, a raincoat, a cotton coat, and so on. When they needed to use it, they would open it. When they were not using it, they would store it in a large bag and carry it on their backs. In this way, they did not need to worry about the cold and slippery roads, allowing their movement speed to be unaffected by the weather. Just this set of equipment for each soldier cost around 10 taels of silver. Multiplied by the number of nearly 100,000 soldiers, this was still a huge sum. At the start, because this work required a lot of money, there were some people who objected, but Yang Chendong reasoned that soldiers had to shed blood in battle. Right now, they were just paying a bit more to ensure their safety on the road. What was not worth it? What could be compared to a human life? As soon as Yang Chendong's questioning voice came out, all the opposing voices disappeared. When this matter was spread, all the soldiers were moved to tears. Following this kind of commander, what complaints did they have? What reason did they have not to risk their lives? The speed of the army continued to increase, and they got closer and closer to their destination, Great Wuxia, or Great Wuxia for short. This time, the initial goal of the expedition was to conquer 2 big cities. Yang Chendong adopted a strategy of dividing the troops into 2. To the north was the Lima city of Wuxia, also known as Wuxia City. The army there was led by Tian Hu, the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army. He led 40,000 cavalry and 300,000 civilians as logistics support. The second group was personally led by Yang Chendong and consisted of more than 30,000 cavalrymen under the command of the new Second Army, as well as 20,000 men from the newly established Russian Division, White Division. At the same time, 300,000 civilians were supported. The so-called Foreign Russian Division referred to a foreign army composed of Russians. For example, Nikolai, whom Yang Chendong first met, served in this division. They were the first to join the 5-star army and were infected by everything the other party had done for them. They had a common trait, which was that they were young and strong. They had once been the protectors of their small tribes. Now that Yang Chendong had unified the Far East, building cities, repairing roads, and opening up wastelands, their lives had changed. They could no longer hide like before and could finally walk out in the open, build their homes, and live safe and hopeful lives. As these young guardians, they joined the 5-star army with the support of the patriarchs and elders of their respective clans, all for the sake of fighting for a future for themselves and for the glory of their own clans. Almost every one of them had come with the hopes of their tribes. This made them more eager than anyone else to enter the battlefield and receive better praise. This was also the reason why Yang Qindong had abandoned the gradually forming Far Eastern Army and instead formed this foreign division. It was important to emphasize that the Far Eastern Army was left behind in the Far East for this war. After nearly a year, Chunbo had finally been reinstated and became the commander of the Far Eastern Army. They were left behind to defend the 5 cities and at the same time, to supervise the civilians under their rule to not cause trouble, which would allow them to work better. According to Yang Qindong's request, there had to be a village with a population of more than 1,000 people within 200 li of each city. In his mind, it was impossible to rely on only 5 cities to revitalize the entire Far East. The role of the cities was to lead the way, and those villages were the points. In order to make the entire Far East prosperous, there had to be enough people. Speaking of which, the 20,000 foreign troops had performed very well along the way. It was as if they knew their identities and were afraid that they would be looked down upon. They were doing their best to perform at every moment and strive to show their best side, so that the great Ming dynasty's martial South King, the Grasslands Heavenly Khan, would take a good look at them. Maybe one day their performance would be good enough to catch his eye. Then they would walk to the peak of their lives. The result of performing well was that the speed of the army increased. The journey that was originally scheduled to take nearly 2 months was completed in 1 month, which was twice as fast. It was the end of April, and the mountains in sight were covered in a layer of light green. The trees had begun a new cycle of growth, and the grass had also sprouted and stubbornly pulled out of the soil. Great Raven City. The weather continued to warm up, causing the city to emit a trace of vitality. The city gates opened and the bazaar opened. Many merchants walked into the city. Many commoners also began to barter in the most primitive way. A Huli called himself the Khan of Zhongxing, and the Great Raven City was the main power under his rule. With the city as the center, the area that stretched out for 500 li was his territory. His general, Shikai, was an unstoppable enemy. Relying on this general, a Huli used nearly 10 years to become the overlord of this area, with 20,000 cavalry under his command. To be able to command 20,000 elite soldiers in Siberia, where the weather was harsh, was enough to make a Huli feel proud. As such, in this place he was like a god, and his words were like an imperial edict. No one dared to go against him. A Huli could be considered an anomaly among the Mongol Khans. He was not like the others who only knew how to kill and think of ways to rob when they ran out of things. He was someone who placed great importance on production and construction. For example, the Great Crow City under his rule had very good public security. Not only did the soldiers not offend the common people, even the merchants who passed by would happily let them pass as long as they paid the taxes according to the area. The safety of the merchants within a radius of 500 miles was guaranteed. As such, the Great Raven City was relatively prosperous, and many nearby tribes even chose to live in the city after understanding the situation. This made the Great Raven City one of the most prosperous cities in the area. Whenever a Huli walked out of his residence and saw the bustling scene in the city, he would smile and be in a good mood. Great Khan, the city is like this because of you. As expected of the Son of the Heavens, you love the people like your own children. You should let us learn from you and imitate you. Seeing that a Huli was in a good mood, Shikai quickly flattered him with a look of worship. Haha. A Huli, who was praised like this, laughed out loud and said humbly, "This is not enough. This Khan is thinking whether or not we can lower the taxes for the people. They have suffered too much." Sigh. When he heard that the taxes would be reduced, Cycle's expression changed, and his eyes flashed with an inexplicable anger. If it was in the past, he would definitely speak up to stop it. Although the taxes in the Great Raven City were a bit high, reaching 5% of the taxes, they protected the people. However, they had ensured the safety of the people. This was something that could not be bought with money in this chaotic world. Speaking of which, this was not the first time a Huli lowered the taxes. Originally, it was 7% of the taxes. Every time it was lowered, Cecil would object. If this went on, it wouldn't be long before the food in the city's storehouse would dwindle. Wouldn't it be dangerous if a war broke out? This time, Shikai did not speak up to stop it. He only hesitated for a moment before saying, "This is the Great Khan's action of caring for the people. It is admirable." General, you don't object? Originally, he was already prepared to give up if Shikai opposed it. In fact, this time he didn't have any hopes of passing this resolution. He was just testing the waters, and he would continue to raise it. Once he raised it enough times, it wouldn't be good for Cecil to keep opposing it. As long as Cecil agreed once, the taxes would naturally be reduced. It was because he was prepared for a long battle that Shikai did not object, which made Ahuli feel a bit uncomfortable. Very quickly, when he saw that no one objected, he immediately seized the opportunity and said, "Since the general agrees, then this matter is settled. We will lower the taxes by 10%. In the future, 4% of the taxes will be enough." "All right, the Great Khan will make the decision," Shikai replied without any change in expression. The matter of lowering the taxes was actually settled so easily. Ahuli was in a good mood and returned to his residence with a group of bodyguards. Zikr also rode back to his residence. Not long after he returned, another captain, Bushi, walked into the study and saw General Zikr sitting in his chair like a golden blade. The two sat facing each other. When there was no third person in the study, Shikai opened his mouth. "Brother Bushi, did you know? The Great Khan lowered the taxes again." "What?" Bushi, who was about to pass the cup of horse milk to his mouth, heard this and his expression changed. He then said with some agitation, "It's still going to be lowered? There are very few merchants in the city, and we don't take care of the land like the Han people. If the taxes are lowered, what will our army eat?" It was no wonder Bushi was so agitated. Although 5% of the taxes in the Great Crow City looked very high, but in reality, there were very few people who could actually pay the taxes. In ancient times, taxes were mainly collected from merchants and farmers. The Mongols were not good at farming, and only merchants paid the taxes. However, there were only a few merchants in the city. If they relied on them, it was impossible to feed the 30,000 cavalry. Now that the taxes were lowered, did they want the soldiers to patrol with empty stomachs? Chapter 1400. Ahuli's idea was good, and he was learning the Han's way of governing a country. However, the problem was that this was Siberia, which was sparsely populated. It was not a bustling city where the Han lived. There were no fertile fields here, unlike the Han's land, which was filled with the fragrance of rice and flowers. This was the so-called Handan learning to walk. In the end, he would even forget how he walked. Ahuli seemed to be walking on that path, which naturally attracted Shikai's dissatisfaction. Another general, Bushi, also had a headache when he heard his decision. What's wrong with the Great Khan? Why isn't brother Shikai persuading him? Bushi's face was filled with confusion. Normally, this kind of thing had happened before, but most of them had been persuaded, unless it was mentioned many times and it was not easy to stop them. However, this seemed to be the first time he mentioned it. How can we persuade him? Can we persuade him this time, but can we persuade him next time? How is he still a Great Khan? He's clearly learning from the Han. If this goes on, I'm afraid that the soldiers won't even be able to afford food and clothing. How can we fight then? If someone makes a move on us, how can we guard against it? Shikai's face was filled with anger. He even forgot the rules and began to criticize the Great Khan. In this regard, Bushi immediately shut his mouth. The other party spoke without thinking in a fit of anger. He could not make such a mistake. Bushi did not speak again, which made Shikai, who was testing him, somewhat dissatisfied. "What? I've already passed the words over. Why don't you say something? Why are you pretending to be mute?" Shikai wanted to see Bushi's opinion because he already had thoughts of rebelling. During the new year, Hulihan sent someone to find him in private and expressed that he was willing to help him become the Khan of the Great Raven City. Hulihan naturally did this because he was threatened by Ahuli. As the security of the Great Raven City became better and better, and the citizens responded positively, The surrounding powers were naturally affected. Just like Hulihan's Wuxia city, at least 1,000 households had already left the city, heading for Ahu's great Wuxia city. Just based on this point, he could not ignore it. If it wasn't for the fact that he had suffered a huge loss in the battle with the 5-star army and couldn't use force to solve the problem, he would have already led his troops over. Since he could not send out his troops, Hulihan thought of another method, which was to let someone else be the Great Khan and replace him. As long as the Great Crow City's policy towards the commoners changed, it would not attract other commoners. This way, the threat to him would not exist. With this thought in mind, the special envoy sent out by Hulihan found the most likely candidate to replace him, General Sakir, and explained his thoughts. He even offered 10,000 taels of silver and promised to send over 1,000 cows and sheep as a congratulatory gift after the matter was settled. This naturally made Cicero overjoyed. He didn't really care about these things. What he liked was Hulihan's attitude towards him. This was the Great Khan with the greatest influence in Siberia. Even he thought highly of him and supported him. Didn't that mean that he was the most capable person who should be in the top position? It was also from then on that Cicero had the idea of seizing the position. During this period of time, he had also talked to some of his trusted subordinates and tactfully probed them. He really managed to persuade a few Kiliarchs to stand on his side. Cicero, who was growing more and more powerful, saw hope. This time he took this opportunity to find Wuxia. He was also testing the other party. The entire Great Crow City only had 20,000 cavalry. The two of them each controlled 10,000 troops. If he could obtain this person's support, he would succeed. However, this time, Wuxia did not say anything. This made Cycle unhappy, but he couldn't show it on his face. Not only that, he could not give up. He knew that once he opened his mouth, there had to be an outcome. Otherwise, it would be too disadvantageous for him. Fortunately, this Wuxia had a fatal flaw, which was that he liked women very much. This general's wealth was basically all used on this path. Coincidentally, Cicero had 2 clean girls in his hands. He had originally planned to leave them for himself, but ever since he became ambitious, he prepared to give them to his trusted subordinates to win people's hearts. This time, in order to obtain Wuxia's support, he decided to give up his capital. Looking at Wuxia, who did not say anything, Cicero laughed and said casually, "Okay, then let's not talk about annoying things. Tonight, come to my residence to drink. You know, I have a pair of white Russian oviparous sisters. Tonight, this general wants to take them into my room. Such a big matter, I should share it with my friends. Drinking big bowls and eating big pieces of meat, isn't that great?" Finally, he stopped talking about the Great Khan. Wuxia let out a sigh of relief. He was not a fool, so he could naturally sense Shikai's disloyal heart. Just now this person had actually talked about the Great Khan. He had already thought about it. After a while he would go talk to the Great Khan and do his duty as a subject. Not mentioning the official matter, Wuxia laughed and said, "That's good. Since that's the case, I will definitely visit Brother Shi's residence tonight." "Ah, good. Since that's the case, let's go now. We can enjoy the White Russian dance. It's quite interesting compared to us Mongolian women." Cicero laughed loudly and stood up to walk to Wuxia's side, looking like he wanted to go with him. He was being watched. Considering that if he did not go now, he might attract Cicero's suspicion. Wuxia could only agree and said, "Since that's the case, please." "Please." Cicero laughed loudly. When he turned around, he raised his eyebrows and a vicious look flashed in his eyes. He had already made up his mind. Tonight, he would have a showdown with Wuxia. If the other party was tactful, then everything would be fine. If the plan did not work, then he could only kill the other party. Cicero's residence. When he returned to the courtyard, the servants began to prepare the banquet. Cicero accompanied him the entire time and did not leave his side at all. This made Wuxia unable to find an excuse to go. He had no choice but to calm down and put his worries aside for the time being. 2 young girls about 1.7 meters tall with graceful figures and incomparably white skin appeared on the stage. As 2 girls who had been seriously trained, their dance steps were graceful. Wearing almost transparent sand clothes, they were graceful. Every movement was filled with flirtatious charm. In just a short while, the lustful Bushi's eyes were fixed on the two girls. He did not move even half a step. Seeing Bushi's devilish appearance, Cicero's eyes flashed with disdain. He then continued to urge him to drink. Not long after, the two girls also walked down the stage. One on the left and one on the right, they nestled beside Bushi. Cup after cup of horse milk wine was poured into their mouths. For a moment, he did not know how much he had drunk. After a moment of dizziness, he lost consciousness. When he woke up again, it was already the middle of the night. Shaking his somewhat dizzy head, he began to observe his surroundings. What entered his eyes was four spotlessly white jade-like arms placed in front of his chest. Upon closer inspection, who else could they be but the twin Russian sisters? Bang! Bushi sat up, followed by two screams. Then the candles in the room were lit. One by one, the guards of the mansion walked into the bedroom. Their fierce eyes were fixed on the half-naked Bushi, who was still at a loss of what to do. What is this? Before Bushi could ask his question, footsteps sounded again. Another set of footsteps came from outside the door. Then Cyril walked in, accompanied by a few bodyguards. When his eyes met Tracy's, and he saw the scene in the bedroom, his eyes widened. He shouted sternly, "What's going on?" This general only went to the army to deal with some urgent military matters. How could something like this happen? General Bushi drank too much wine. After you left, he pestered the two girls and chased us out. He even said that this was the general's order, and we did not dare to disobey. But I never thought that General Bushi would do such a despicable thing. We really didn't expect this. Now that we have made a big mistake, please punish us, General. After the four guards who had entered the bedroom first finished speaking, they knelt on the ground with a plop. What? There is such a thing? You all deserve to die. Men. Hearing this, the furious Cicero's face changed. He pointed at the four guards and said, "Dereliction of duty. Take them away and give each of them 30 strokes of the military rod." Yes. The personal guards behind Cicero acknowledged, and went forward to drag the four kneeling personal guards away. Soon after, everyone walked out of the bedroom. Soon after, miserable screams rang out in the courtyard. Every time there was a sound, Bushi, who was still half-naked, would frown. Then he looked at the two Russian women lying on the side, who had already woken up. Looking at their fearful eyes, his heart was filled with bitterness. At this moment, if he still did not know that he had been set up, then he would not be worthy of being a 10,000-man commander. He did not believe that he would do such a stupid thing after drinking too much. It was true that he was lustful, but his alcohol tolerance was not bad. It was not to the extent that he could not control his body just because he drank in someone else's house. The reason why such a thing happened must be because there was something wrong with the wine. He was afraid that there was medicine there. He should have been carried here while he was unconscious. Needless to say, the mastermind behind all of this was Cicero. It seemed that when he showed his dissatisfaction with the Great Khan during the day, he did not receive a reply. He had misgivings and used all kinds of despicable methods. Now that he had something on him, it was time to talk about the conditions. Cicero was also staring at Bushi. He had to admit that his method was a bit too straightforward. However, he was not a smart person. It was not easy for him to think of such a method. The most important thing was that it was effective. With Ahuli's temperament, he had already given a strict order in the Great Crow City to prohibit any bullying of men and women. If it was discovered, regardless of the identity of the offender, they would be severely punished. In addition, Bushi's mouth was not good when it came to women. As long as this matter was reported to the Great Khan, it would be inevitable. After that, it was only natural that he would be stripped of his status as a major. Chapter 1401. In other words, at this time, Zyker had already grasped Bushi's lifeline. Next, it would depend on whether the other party cooperated with him. If he didn't, he could only report this matter. Without a helper, he couldn't have another opponent. Bushi suddenly opened his mouth. First he let out a long sigh, then said with some bitterness, "Brother Shi, if you have something to say, just say it." Why do you have to beat around the bush? Don't you have a problem with the Great Khan? What do you want to do? Brother will cooperate with you. In this short period of time, Bushi also understood that he was now a fish on the chopping block. If he didn't cooperate, he would lose his position and be severely punished. If a person who was used to being a general suddenly lost his military power, what was the difference between him and a dead man? Originally, he was still thinking about how to persuade Bushi. If the other party refused to comply, would he really report it to the Great Khan? If this person saw the Great Khan and told the whole story, although the Great Khan might not believe it, the Great Khan would definitely be on guard against him. In this way, it wouldn't be a good thing for his plan. Unexpectedly, when he was still thinking about what to do next, the other party had already opened his mouth and admitted defeat. Zyker naturally wasn't worried that Bushi would lie to him. Just now, not only him, but also the 8 guards had witnessed everything. It was far from something that Bushi could just pull up his pants and deny. Since that was the case, didn't it mean that his plan had succeeded? The happy Zyker's face was no longer angry. Instead he laughed. Ha ha ha, Brother Bushi is really a smart person. Since that's the case, let's not beat around the bush in front of a straightforward person. I'll be frank with you. What the Great Khan has done is in conflict with our Mongolian traditions in too many ways. Since the beginning of our ancestors, we've been robbing people for a living. We've never done anything like business or governing a city. You still want to ask for so many rules and regulations. Do you really think you're a saint or a gentleman? If this goes on, the people will be happy, but the warriors won't even be able to eat. Isn't this putting the cart before the horse? First, he complained a lot, acting like a whore who still wanted to establish a monument to her chastity. He talked about many of the Great Khan's problems. Then his tone changed and he said righteously, "For the future of the Mongolian warriors, this general has decided to remonstrate with the Great Khan. It's just that my strength alone is meager, so I need Brother Bushi's help." Finally, the dagger, Bushi secretly said in his heart. This is really a traitor. Pretending to be shocked, Bushi said, "Brother Shi, if this matter doesn't succeed, it will be a death sentence." What? Is Brother Bu still afraid? What kind of thing do you not dare to do? As he spoke, he glanced sideways at the 2 Caucasian twin sisters who were still lying on the bed, their clothes slightly disheveled. These 2 women were evidence. Before the matter was settled, it was better not to touch the scene. He had already checked. These 2 women did not know Mongolian, so he could say anything in front of them without worry. He cursed in his heart. He was basically drugged and sent here. He didn't even touch a single hair on these 2 women. Wasn't it too unfair to threaten him with this? Naturally, this was just a thought in his heart. Bushi did not dare to question it, because if this matter was known by the Great Khan, he was afraid that no one would listen to his side of the story. Seeing that Bushi did not immediately object and was thinking about it, Zyker was overjoyed. He quickly said, "Besides, it's not like I didn't make any preparations. There are already several Kiliarchs in the army who have agreed to work for me. Even one of the Great Khan's personal guards is already one of my men. Believe me, as long as you and I work together, we will succeed." Finally showing his trump card, Bushi sighed in his heart. He knew that if he had heard all these things, then he would definitely not have the chance to object now. In other words, he would either rebel with Shikir, or he would die. "Brother Bushi, as long as you help me succeed, you will be second only to one person and above millions of people. Not only will I give you these 2 sisters, as long as you take a fancy to any woman in the city, you can capture them and bring them home. Wouldn't that be great?" Zyker continued to raise the price. He had already investigated. This lecherous man often lingered in the city's brothels, especially the few pretty girls that he had visited several times. If it was not for the fact that the other party was a virgin and could not be forced, he would have already married her as a concubine. As long as Ahuri was still the Great Khan, he would not be able to carry out this plan. Thus, overthrowing Ahuri would most likely be beneficial to Bushi. After promising many benefits, the light in Bushi's eyes grew brighter and brighter. When he saw the white Russian sisters from the corner of his eyes, his instincts won over his rationality. He finally nodded and said, "In that case, Bushi is willing to follow Brother Zyker's lead. Oh ha ha ha, good brother. Don't worry, once I become the great Khan, I will definitely not treat you unfairly. At that time, we will jointly control the Great Crow City and share wealth, ha ha ha. Finally achieving his wish, Zyker's face was filled with joy. The cooperation had been reached. According to Zyker's intention, Bushi would stay the night here. This time, he guaranteed that no one would disturb them. However, how could Bushi, who had something on his mind, sleep? He had to go back and call for his trusted subordinates to work with them. Zyker also knew that the important matter was more important, so he nodded and praised. Good, in that case, you can go back and prepare. Don't worry, these sisters will definitely be left for General Bushi. In that case, many thanks. Bushi said indifferently. Once the matter was settled, he would not only have this pair of sisters by his side, there would only be more women serving him. At that time, wouldn't it be beautiful every night? Bushi finally put on his clothes and said goodbye to Zyker. After adding a large helping hand, Zyker was in a good mood. He immediately headed to the back of the residence. Although the sisters in front of him were not bad-looking, he had already promised Bushi and would not go back on his word. Zyker left. Before he left, he told the two women to have a good night's sleep, and instructed the guards not to disturb them. However, what he did not know was that right after he left, the elder sister quickly got up and put on a jacket. Then she took out a note that she had prepared beforehand and wrote something on it. About an hour later, the soft meowing of a cat could be heard from outside the window. After 3 consecutive beeps, the window of the room opened from the inside. A slender arm stretched out, and a note was thrown out of the window. A black shadow came as promised. He picked up the note and quickly left. In the pitch-black night, he was like a ghost, coming and going in a hurry. No one noticed or thought that this pair of Caucasian oviparous sisters had another identity. They were outside agents of Yang Xie's intelligence department. Yang Xie's intelligence department was mainly made up of 2 major parts. One was the earliest security bureau, and the other was the Central Intelligence Bureau, which was established later. The former followed Yang San's lead and was mostly men. The latter was led by Madame Su Maner and was mostly women. This way, they could ensure that there were few blind spots in the information, and they could also supervise each other. This pair of Caucasian oviparous sisters were outside agents of the Central Intelligence Bureau. Everywhere they went, developing young and beautiful women had long been something that the Central Intelligence Bureau's core personnel had to do. At first glance, these weak women did not seem to be of much use. However, when their natural beauty and good looks were put to use, they could obtain information that men could not obtain even if they worked hard for a long time. Just like the information this time, it was obtained so easily and without any effort. Originally, the 2 women were already prepared to counterattack. In order to preserve their innocence, no matter who the man in front of them was, whether it was Xiqian or Busi, the 2 women would use their newly learned joint killing technique to kill them. If they were completely unprepared, and if they intentionally got the other party drunk, they would have at least a 60% chance of success. No matter what they did, not only would they preserve their innocence, they would also make a great contribution. They would eliminate a threatening opponent for the 5-star army. They never thought that the development of the situation would be so dramatic. Before the 2 women could take the risk, they received such important information. How could they not understand Mongolian? They were just pretending that they did not understand. Now they had indeed made a great contribution. The news of the 2 women was sent out by a guard in charge of their safety. It did not take long for it to reach Yang Qindong's hands. After reading the information, Yang Qindong pondered for a moment, then raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "The CIA has made a great contribution this time and should be rewarded. I never thought that a Huri would be so different from the other Mongolian Khans. This is a person who wholeheartedly wants to work for the people. Try to win him over." "Young master, I understand. I will arrange it now." Beta Persei could be said to be the person who understood Yang Qindong's thoughts the most, so she immediately agreed. "Well, you must find a way to protect a Huri's life. This matter can be done by the Security Bureau in cooperation with the CIA. Yang Chendong certainly knew that the two intelligence departments had the intention to compete with each other. When there was a comparison, they would be more motivated to work together. But sometimes it was inevitable that there would be some constraints under the competition. This time, he directly pointed out the relationship between the two, because he did not want to see the problem arise from the insiders. I will give a stern warning to some people. Beta Persei nodded heavily. When he walked to the telegraph office, he thought for a moment and sent a telegram to his brother Yang San, asking him to restrain his subordinates. This time, the CIA's team leader was in charge. In the Great Raven City, whether it was Cecil or General Bushi, they were making all kinds of preparations. They were constantly calling their generals to meet and prepare for the food uprising. Ahuri, as their great Khan, was completely unaware of all this. He still focused on the people's livelihood. Chapter 1402. Ahuli had a tough life. His mother had died in childbirth when he was born, and his father had died in a battle between the tribes when he was not even 3 years old. He had practically begged for food since he was young, and had seen countless hardships. At that time, the happiest thing was that he could have a safe place to stay and eat his fill. Perhaps because he had suffered too much since he was young, after Ahuli became famous, he did not want the people under his rule to suffer like that. Thus he began to care about the people. Although he did not have a foundation and did not know how to farm, and did not do many things well, the good governance of the Great Crow City still attracted the attention of many people. When he saw the number of people in the city increasing, Ahuli's eyes would always flash with excitement. No matter what, he had provided a safe living environment for everyone. Just this point alone was a great contribution. A great Khan who did not pay attention to the army under him, but to see how the ordinary people were doing? It had to be said that it was a kind of weirdo. His every action had attracted the dissatisfaction of some people in the army, and his situation had become dangerous. However, no one knew the true purpose of Chun Huli's actions. Just like now, what he had in his hands was the list of recruits who had signed up to join the army. As a great Khan, he had seriously looked for a Han Xiaotsai to teach him how to read. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that he was more ambitious than other Mongol great Khans. There were more than 400 people on this list, and they were all weak Mongol and White Russian tribesmen, who had just arrived at the Great Crow City. They were grateful that Ahuli had brought them a safe living environment, so they wanted to join the army to repay his kindness. This is the result. Looking at this list, Ahuli's face was filled with excitement, and when he spoke, his voice trembled slightly. How could someone as smart as him not know that his actions had already caused some people to dislike him? However, he didn't say anything because he knew very well that he was going to walk a completely different path from the other Mongol Khans. Since they were different, it was natural that they would be met with some confusion, and even criticism. However, once he succeeded, the rewards would be great. Before he succeeded, all he needed to do was continue to persevere and withstand all the pressure. Fortunately, the results were not bad. Although he had been misunderstood for a few years, the results were finally showing. More than 400 people joined the army today. If this continued, wouldn't it be easy for him to achieve his goal of expanding the army? At that time, when he had enough troops, who in the Siberian region would be his match? Considering the geographical environment, the lack of population was the biggest obstacle to Ahuli's development. For example, wasn't the reason why people called him the most powerful great Khan in Wuxia was because he had 30,000 soldiers, far more than Ahuli's 20,000 soldiers? And if there was a day when his military strength reached 30,000, he would have the qualifications to compete with them. At that time, would he still be far from the position of the biggest Khan in this region? Ahuli's hard work finally bore fruit, and he saw hope. Ahuli was overjoyed and wanted to share the results with others. He ordered his bodyguards to summon Sikar and Bushi. He wanted to announce the results in front of everyone, and let his two important subordinates know how powerful he was as the great Khan. Ahuli was still thinking about how the two highly regarded generals would be as excited as he was once they knew that there were so many new recruits joining the army. However, all of a sudden, the sound of battle cries came from outside. Following that, his personal guard captain ran to him with a panicked expression. He knelt down and said, "Great Khan, something bad has happened. Generals Sikar and Bushi have brought people to surround our residence. They are now bringing people to kill us." "What? What's going on?" Ahuli was shocked, and his eyes were as big as bells. He reached out and grabbed the captain's collar as he shouted, This should be because they want to rebel." The captain of the bodyguards replied with a pale face. He had heard some rumors before, saying that the Great Khan didn't do his job properly and helped the people instead of the soldiers. He had reminded the Great Khan many times about this, but the Great Khan didn't take it to heart. Ahuli loosened his grip and murmured, "Rebellion? Rebellion? Why are they here? They don't know this Khan's good intentions." Seeing that the Great Khan was still lamenting, the captain couldn't help but say anxiously, "Please lead us to a bloody path. We are willing to use our lives to protect the Great Khan." "No need." In the blink of an eye, Ahuli had recovered his previous calmness. He waved his hand and said confidently, "Since they have already surrounded our courtyard, how can it be so easy to break out? Come, follow this Khan. I want to ask the two generals, where did this Khan go wrong?" Since there was no escape, it was better to face it calmly. After saying this, Ahuli strode out. Outside the courtyard, there were already more than 20 corpses lying on the ground. Among them were Ahuli's personal guards, as well as the personal guards brought by Shikai and Busi. Since the matter was settled, the two of them led a group of reliable personal guards to kill their way over. As long as Ahuli was dead, there would be no obstacles in their way to take over the military. "Stop!" Ahuli walked out of the inner courtyard. When he arrived at the courtyard, he shouted, separating the two sides of personal guards. No matter what, he had been the Great Khan for several years, and his aura was still quite impressive. Taking advantage of the temporary pause in the fighting, he strode to the battlefield and pointed with his right hand. "Where are Shikai and Busi? You even dare to rebel? Don't tell me you don't even have the courage to show your face?" After all, he had been the Great Khan for so many years. Ahuli's strong body trembled, and the entire place fell silent. Everyone involuntarily put down their weapons. Even Shikai and Busi, who were hiding behind the personal guards, could only take the initiative to stand out. At this moment, they definitely wouldn't show the slightest bit of fear. If even they were afraid, how would the soldiers below react? "Are you finally not going to be a coward?" Seeing that his two most trusted subordinates had finally walked out, Ahuli asked with a furious expression. He didn't think he had mistreated these two, especially Shikai. Back then he had even saved Shikai's life. Why did he want to rebel now? Although Shikai was very talkative when he talked about Ahuli behind Ahuli's back, he immediately became mute in front of the real person. He was used to being inferior to others, and on top of that, Ahuli was his savior. He didn't have much confidence. Shikai stood out with a frown on his face, not saying a word. Busi, on the other hand, was a bit unhappy. "What? You're admitting defeat when it's time for real? What about me? You two have a good relationship. Perhaps even if the rebellion fails, I can't really kill you. But I can't." Busi admitted that his relationship with Ahuli wasn't bad, but it wasn't so good that he could ignore everything. Thus, he had no other choice at this moment. "Ahuli, there's no need for you to be hypocritical here. You want us all to work for you, but you only have the lowliest commoners in your eyes. May I ask if you're a qualified Great Khan?" He was afraid that his momentum would weaken, and he was also afraid that Shikai would shake the morale of the troops, causing everything to go to waste. He had no choice but to speak up. When Ahuli heard Busi's question, he was infuriated. Everything that this person had now was given to him by him. It was hateful that he didn't know how to repay his kindness. Now he actually dared to call him by his name. He really wanted to rebel. After thinking about it, he pointed at Yoshi and said, "Shikai, did you listen to the slanderous words of this despicable person?" At this moment, Shikai also came back to his senses. He thought that once he became the Great Khan, everything here would be his. He wouldn't have to look at other people's faces anymore. At this moment, his expression changed from hesitation to determination. The brave Ahuli of the past is already dead. The current you is not worthy of the position of great Khan. Stretching out his finger, Zikr pointed at Ahuli, his eyes filled with determination. After finally saying those words, Cycle felt his whole body relax a lot, as if a huge rock that was pressing down on him had suddenly been removed. Good. Ahuli staggered. Even the person he trusted the most, the person who had saved his life, was rebelling against him. This was really his failure as a person. Thinking about how he had struggled for half his life, only to be betrayed by his friends and family, Ahuli couldn't help but laugh at the sky. Ha. You're just a group of short-sighted, despicable people. You don't understand this Khan's painstaking efforts. Ahuli really had a lot to say. From a poor boy with no background to the current position of Khan of a tribe, he had experienced too much and seen too much. Therefore, he had a lot of ideas of his own. In his opinion, Mongolia should not be nomadic. At the very least, it should enter a half-pastoral and half-agricultural state. They had to ensure that they had production. This wasn't just a sign of progress. More importantly, plundering wasn't the way to strengthen oneself. Just like in the past dynasties, they mainly looted and plundered. Many times, they even treated the land of China as their own back garden, giving people the feeling that they had no money and no food. Just by walking around here, they would have everything. It seemed like they had endless glory, but who knew about their own suffering? If it wasn't for the fact that they had no food and couldn't survive, why would they do something like plundering that could cost them their lives? Not to mention, whenever a heroic ruler appeared in China, they would send troops to the grasslands to train. It was as if only by defeating them could they prove the strength and wisdom of the Han people. Chapter 1403. For this reason, sometimes the location of the loot would change. Wasn't this all because he didn't care about production and didn't understand construction and management? Unfortunately, not many people could understand such a simple principle, and no one thought of changing it. Now he decided to make some changes. If he succeeded, it would be equivalent to finding another way for the Mongols to survive other than being nomads. After a few years, he had accumulated some experience and laid a good foundation for the people. If he continued, things would definitely get better and better. If his subordinates rebelled, wouldn't everything be for naught? He didn't want to hand over his achievements just like that, nor did he want his efforts to go to waste. More than that, he wanted to prove that he was still brave and good at fighting. He stretched out his hand and said, "Men, bring me this Khan's mace." Ahuli himself had boundless strength. It was precisely because of this that he was able to defeat countless opponents and become the current Khan. Although he had mainly focused on building the city in the past few years, he still had his own foundation. He believed that he would have no problem dealing with Cycle and Busi working together. He stretched out his arm, but it was not the huge mace that responded to him. On the contrary, a machete suddenly came slashing at him. With a gust of wind, Ahuli instinctively moved his body to the side. It was this one step that saved his life, but there was already a bright red wound under his ribs. It could be imagined that if he hadn't dodged in time, his life would have been taken away just now. After being slashed by the scimitar, Ahuli, who was already injured, immediately turned around and saw his bodyguard captain staring at him with wide eyes and a nervous expression. He angrily stretched out his arm and pointed at him. "Even you are rebelling against this Khan?" No. This sudden scene and this sudden accusation stunned the other bodyguards at first, but then they came back to their senses. In particular, the captain of the bodyguards, who was not far away, directly slashed his scimitar across the neck of the captain. Immediately, blood splashed high into the air, and the captain fell to the ground with a terrified expression, dead. After the captain killed the captain, he led a group of bodyguards in front of Ahuli and shouted, "We pledge our lives to follow the great Khan." Okay. Ahuli smiled with relief. He was not a complete failure as a person. With a sigh, he reached out and took the mace handed to him by another woman. Then he turned to look at CKE and Percy and said, "Come, let's fight. I want to see who is the true barter of the grasslands." "He's already injured." He won't be able to hold on for much longer. Let's go together. Seeing that Ahuli was still so heroic, Cicero's expression couldn't help but change. But now that things had come to this, it was either you die or I die. He no longer had a choice. After he said that to Bushi, the two of them stepped forward together and surrounded Ahuli from both sides. The three main generals fought together, and the bodyguards below also began to fall into chaos. In a short period of time, the courtyard was filled with the sounds of weapons clashing. From time to time, there would be Mongolian warriors falling to the ground. The smell of blood quickly filled the small courtyard, making people want to vomit. Ahuli's awe-inspiring aura was not any less than before. He waved the 38-gene mace in his hand and repeatedly forced Percy to retreat to the side. If not for Cicero saving him a few times, he would have already been smashed under the mace. Ha ha ha, let's see if this Khan is heroic. Cough cough. Ahuli, who had just shouted, could not help but cough a few times. In the end, because of the wound, he had lost too much blood and had damaged his foundation. Now that he was bleeding profusely, if this continued, he would not be able to hold on for much longer. When Cicero saw Ahuli's performance, he could not help but be happy and said, "He's almost done. Let's hold on for a bit longer." Okay. Percy looked at the large hole in his scimitar caused by the collision with the mace and gritted his teeth as he replied. After all, they had the advantage in numbers and were the ones who initiated the attack. After 15 minutes, most of Ahuli's bodyguards were dead. Even Ahuli himself had lost too much blood and was showing signs of weakness. Whether it was his strength or reflexes, he was not even a quarter of his usual strength. Cicero saw the changes in Ahuli, and his eyes shone brightly. He could almost see the throne of the great Khan in front of him. He could almost see the moment when thousands of people would submit to him. Is this Khan really going to die here? Ahuli's face was full of grievance and unwillingness. When he felt that the strength in his body was about to be sucked dry, he knew his end. At this moment, he was filled with regret. Could it be that he was wrong? Could it be that the Mongolian warriors were destined to only have one path? Boom. Just when everyone was thinking about different things, a huge explosion suddenly sounded out. A large part of the walls of the courtyard collapsed due to the explosion, revealing a temporary path for horses to pass through. Amidst the huge explosion, the two sides who were fighting in the courtyard could not help but stop. Everyone could not understand what was going on. Why would there be an explosion? Could it be that it was caused by lightning? Great Khan, quickly leave with us. Just when everyone was still in a daze, a dozen men dressed in ordinary Mongolian clothing rushed in through the gap. They quickly walked to the injured Ahuli and shouted, "You are." Seeing that the newcomers were unfamiliar, and that he could not figure out their identities, Ahu revealed a nervous expression. "Great Khan, quickly leave. The commotion here will attract more people. If you don't leave now, it will be too late." One of the men said hurriedly, then nodded to the people behind him. One of them walked out and pulled over a strong horse, then helped Ahuli onto the horse. The other Mongolian people were holding Big Dipper crossbows. With a few shots, they forced back Shikai and Bushi, who wanted to charge forward. Then, under everyone's gaze, they turned around and left. "General, we have to chase after them. Don't let them escape," Bushi shouted anxiously, intending to chase after them. "Let them go. Ahuli is injured and has lost so much blood. It will be difficult for him to survive. It is only a beast king that is about to die. He is no longer a threat to us. There are more important things waiting for us to do." Shikai shook his head. He was very wary of the Big Dipper crossbows in the hands of those Mongolian people. He had a feeling that they did not intend to kill him. Otherwise, he would be dead by now. Although he was curious about the other party's background, and why they appeared at such a crucial time, he still did not have enough control over the army. There were still many loyal followers of Ahuli. Now that he had to deal with them, he had no choice but to let Ahuli leave with his injuries. Ahuli escaped. He only brought along 2 bodyguards who were also injured. Halfway through, he fainted due to excessive blood loss. He did not even have the chance to ask who saved him. This is caused by excessive blood loss. Take him to a safe place. Check his blood type and prepare to transfuse. Leader Wang Guang examined one of the wounds and made a decision after pulling up a Huli's eyelids. Wang Guang, the leader of the Security Bureau's operations in Siberia, was ordered by the CIA's operations leader, Meng Li, to save a Huli. The news was reported to Meng Li by the Caucasian oviparous sisters, which gave the CIA the upper hand. It was not easy for Wang Guang to receive the mission to save a Huli. No matter what, he had to complete it well. Otherwise, he would really lose out to those women in the CIA. Not long after a Huli left, the Inner Mongolian soldiers who heard the explosion rushed over. Then, Cycle said that the Khan had been attacked and was killed by the explosion. Now he was in charge of the city, with the support of Busi and the other Kiliarchs. Although there were still some Kiliarchs who did not understand, without a Huli's leadership, they could only behave for the time being. Before seeing a Huli's corpse and hearing the news of his death, Cycle was still very cautious. He did not immediately change the policies in the Great Crow City. It looked like it was still the same as before. The only difference was that there were more Mongolian soldiers patrolling the streets. Although the explosion that day was sudden, a Huli was still an extremely strict general. After the explosion, the soldiers guarding the city closed the 4 cities. Before confirming that a Huli had not left the city, Cycle increased the intensity of the search. Only when he saw a Huli's corpse would he be at ease to ascend the throne and do what he wanted to do. Although the city gates were closed and no one could leave the city without a warrant, sending out a telegram did not require the permission of the soldiers guarding the city. The telecommunications department received the telegram from the intelligence department on time. After knowing that a Huli had been saved and that he would be able to get out of bed in about 3 days, Yang Qindong gave the order that the army must arrive at the Great Crow City on time within 3 days. At that time, he would come to the center and coordinate with the outside. No one knew about the arrival of the 5-star army. This was due to their knowledge of the weather. Before the snow melted, it was not suitable to mobilize an army. Not to mention, the 5-star army's scouting methods were not something normal Mongolian scouts could compare to. With their telescopes, as long as they were careful, it would not be hard to discover the enemy's cavalry. Along the way, the 5-star army's scouts had captured and killed close to 50 Mongolian scouts. Finally, on the 3rd day, they arrived 5 li outside of the Great Crow City. Following Yang Qindong's orders, the army hid and rested. They would wait for orders to attack tomorrow. At this time, within the city, Cycle, who did not know anything about the outside world, was frowning and looking at General Busi. It had been 7 days since the start of the search. According to the soldiers, they had already turned the Great Crow City upside down. However, there was still no news of a Huli. This made them both worried and happy. Chapter 1404. They were happy because so much time had passed. With the amount of blood Ahuri had lost, he must have died a long time ago. What he was worried about was that anything could happen before they saw Ahuli's body. They were too focused on Ahuri's matter. No one cared about the fact that the scouts outside the city had not contacted them for a few days. Perhaps the 2 generals thought that the weather had just improved and no one would have any ideas about the Great Wu City. After a few years of living peacefully, they had let down their guard and decided their ending. Announce it, Great Khan. After a long time, Bushi finally stopped being silent and expressed his attitude. Shikair's body shook when he heard this. His long-time wish was about to be fulfilled. It was impossible to say that he was not moved. But before there was a confirmation of Ahuri's death, he was still a little nervous. Seeing that Shikai did not immediately agree, Bushi tried to persuade him again. Great Khan, the army cannot be without a commander for a day. As long as you succeed the position of Great Khan, even if Ahuli comes back to life, what can he do? At that time, the army will be full of generals who support the Great Khan. There is no need to worry about any storms. But if this drags on for too long, the army will become unstable. Shikai also knew that Bushi's words were for his own good. He thought that as long as he succeeded the position of Great Khan, the matter would be settled. Even if there was a problem, he could use the position of Great Khan to give orders. In the end he nodded. Good, then I will have to trouble General Bushi. Shikai finally agreed. Bushi's face was naturally filled with joy. He quickly said, "Good, then the Great Khan will leave everything to me. Tomorrow is the auspicious day. I will go and prepare." Soon, the news spread throughout the army. Since Great Khan Ahuri had died in battle, the most senior and most meritorious Shikai would succeed the position of Great Khan. The ceremony would be held tomorrow morning. At that time, all the cavalry would be given 1 silver as a reward. The commoners who attended the ceremony would receive a day's worth of food. The ceremony was so grand. It was to show the righteousness of the Great Khan. Often, when a person lacks something, they would want to show it to the outside world to prove that they had something. It was also a move to buy people's hearts. Whether it was giving out silver or food, although it wasn't a lot, it was mainly to show the new Khan's concern for the army and the people. This was the most important thing. Once the news was out, the entire city's 100,000 citizens soon knew about it. This was the first time many of them had heard of Ahuli's death, and they couldn't help but feel sad. They weren't sure if the new Mongol Khan would still take care of them, but more people were happy for that day's rations. In any case, it was always a good thing to get some food for free. In Siberia, where there were few fields, food was very precious. The whole city knew about this, and many people were looking forward to the new Khan's succession tomorrow. To them, although Ahuri treated them well and gave them a relatively safe living environment, a dead person was obviously not worth much compared to the benefits they could get from it. This was the pitiful nature of human nature. This was the reality of life. Under the expectant gazes of the crowd, early the next morning, Cycle changed into a dignified new robe with wide sleeves. He also held the scepter that represented his identity as the Khan. Accompanied by Busi and a group of bodyguards, he walked towards the largest square in the city. On both sides of the road, there were countless citizens waiting there. Firstly, they could watch the show, and secondly, they could drink and eat for the day. No matter how one looked at it, it was a good deal. Also in the crowd, Yang Xie's intelligence personnel were also observing the surroundings. Today was also an important day for them. Wearing clean clothes and cloth armor, holding sabers, numerous Mongol cavalry came to the square to maintain order. At the same time, they were also witnesses to the new Khan's succession. As the auspicious time approached, Cycle finally appeared under the crowd. He had a smile on his face, and the corners of his mouth curled upwards. That smile couldn't be hidden. Ever since he was saved by Ahuri and saw the might of the Khan, he had been dreaming about this beautiful dream. Now that it had finally come true, the excitement made him unable to control himself. If it wasn't for the fact that he had to maintain the dignity of a Khan, he would have jumped up in joy. A monkey wearing a crown. In the crowd, Guangzhen brought a few intelligence personnel to watch this scene. Unknowingly, these words came out of his mouth. Perhaps because Yang Chendong was the heavenly Khan, in the eyes of the Yangxie people who were loyal to him, the other Khans in the world were all fake, and they were all their enemies. Not far from Guangzhen and the others, Ahuri, who was wearing a black robe and covering his face, was also watching this scene. If it was someone close to him, they would be able to hear the sound of his teeth grinding against each other. It was a kind of hatred that made one want to eat flesh. Ahuri, who had fainted, had been staying in the basement that Yang Xie's intelligence department had dug out to heal his injuries. What he didn't expect was that his seemingly incurable excessive blood loss had been revived through a blood transfusion. The ancients said that the body, hair, and skin were all given to the parents, not to mention the blood in the body. How could he give it to others so easily? How could others accept it just like that? This was a life-saving grace. Compared to the people he had saved betraying him, the five-star army, the people who were most likely to become his enemy, had actually saved him. The contrast between the two made him sigh. Ahuli was a person who knew how to be grateful. Now that the five-star army had saved his life, he naturally had to repay them as a man. Thus, he decided to cooperate with Guangzhen. This was not only to repay the five-star army's kindness, but also to take revenge for himself. Thus he came. As for when the basement was dug out, Ahuri didn't really care. He could see that the five-star army's thoughts about Great Crow City were not new. They must have had this idea for a long time. To think that he thought that he had the entire situation in Great Crow City under control. This was really a slap to his face. Ahuri, who was wearing a black robe, stood in the crowd and looked at Zicker's awe-inspiring appearance. He clenched his fists and waited for the most crucial moment to step out. How would Zicker know that under the protection of the crowd, he was walking step by step towards a high platform that was temporarily set up yesterday? The sacrificial items had already been prepared there. He only needed to go up under the wizard's prayer and accept the baptism. Then he would be conferred the position of the new Khan by the longevity heaven. At that time, he would completely walk out of Ahuri's shadow. From today onwards, as long as Ahuri lived in the past, he wouldn't need to be afraid at all. His face was serious and his eyes were filled with anticipation. This was the first time he felt that the wizard was so long-winded. He had already been standing there for half an hour, but the other party was still singing and dancing, as if he didn't want to get to the point. How would Zicker know that the wizard had already been dealt with by Guangzhen? Now that his family was in the hands of the spies, all his actions were just to delay time and cooperate with the 5-star army. Outside Great Crow City, Yang Chendong looked at the military watch on his wrist. Seeing that the hour hand was pointing to the time to make a move, he lightly pointed to Beta Persei, who was following beside him. Beta Persei, who had been waiting on horseback for a long time, immediately ordered the artillery to prepare the cannoneers. At the same time, the cavalry was ready to launch an attack. They wanted to blast open the city gate at the first moment and let the army enter the city, giving the enemy a surprise attack. This time, Yang Chendong not only wanted to defeat the Mongolian tribe, but he also wanted the Great Crow City. From the Far East region to the Siberian region, the mountains were high and the roads were dangerous. It was really difficult to travel. If they didn't establish a logistical base here in advance, then the logistical supply would be a big problem during the battle. Yang Chendong rarely let the soldiers fight on an empty stomach. In his view, this was a sign of the incompetence of the general. If the soldiers couldn't even eat their fill, how could they talk about winning the battle? Originally, he was still worried about this problem. But when he understood the situation of the Great Crow City, and saw that the periphery of the city was quite spectacular from afar, he had an idea. Why not continue Ahuli's efforts and build the city even higher, and make it the strongest fortress of the 5-star army in the Siberian region? In the future, all the food and logistical supplies transported from the Far East could be stored here. This way, he would have more confidence and a higher chance of victory in the upcoming battle with the Golden Horde. With this idea, Yang Chendong would not allow the Great Crow City to be destroyed. How to quickly rush into the city and excavate the city became something that Yang Chendong had to calculate. Beta Persei let the army prepare for the attack. The commander of the new 2nd Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Xiao Chao, and the others also mounted their horses and put on their armor. They held light and sharp knives in their hands, and were ready to attack at any time. With such an opportunity to perform well in front of Bugnam of Gojoseon, all the commanders and soldiers were holding their breaths in their hearts. They all hoped that they could be the first soldiers and the first officers to enter the city. Everything was ready, except for the east wind. In the Great Crow City, the east wind finally blew at the time when the time arrived. To everyone's surprise, the first person to react was the adept who had been singing, dancing, and talking for a long time. Just when tens of thousands of people and soldiers were looking at each other, the wizard finally stopped talking, which made many people relax. Among the onlookers, there was no lack of elderly people. This was not the first time they had participated in the self-titled cons. But there had never been a time like this where the ceremony lasted for such a long time, which made them a little confused. Many people thought in their hearts, "This wizard is too good at showing off. I don't know what's wrong with him, but he talks so much. Does it take so long to worship the heavens?" Chapter 1405. The good thing was that it was finally over. Everyone was waiting for the shaman to speak. He wanted to use the name of Tengri to make Saikir the new Khan. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Everyone in the square shut their mouths at the same time. Even the children were warned by their parents to keep their mouths shut. It was as if they were afraid that crying at this moment would bring bad luck, and they would be punished. Saikir and the other generals also looked at the shaman, waiting for the final judgment. Under such circumstances, the shaman finally spoke. He shouted loudly, "After I communicated with Tingri, I received a notice. Saikir." As he spoke, the shaman's gaze fell on Saikir, who was full of anticipation. He said, "Saikir is an abandoned disciple of Tingri. He forced the death of his savior. He is unfilial and has been abandoned by the heavens. Everyone has the right to punish him." What? For a moment, everyone's eyes widened. Some did not believe it. Some even dug their ears with their hands. They could not believe it. Saikir's smile froze. After he understood everything, he turned to look at Busi, who was beside him. His first instinct told him that this must be the work of this person. He had entrusted everything to this person. Now that there was a problem, who else could it be but him? In fact, he should have known that Busi was also an ambitious person. It was all his fault for being careless. Saikir's cold gaze fell on him. Busi could not help but shiver. Then he thought of something and shook his head. "It's not me. It's not me. Men, take down the shaman and kill him." "Who dares?" Seeing that Busi wanted to destroy the evidence, Saikir was not going to let it go. He shouted angrily and stopped a few Mongolian soldiers who were about to rush out. Before the matter was thoroughly investigated, Siko would not allow anything to happen to the Magi. Otherwise, he would forever be labeled as a person abandoned by the heavens. Moreover, wizards were not easy to kill. In the Mongol tribes at that time, they needed the guidance of wizards to ask for luck, to see a doctor, to build a big tent, and to look at feng shui. Such people had a strong influence among the people. If they wanted to kill a wizard now, the people who came to watch the ceremony would not agree. Sure enough, there was a commotion among the commoners. Someone shouted, "Protect the wizard." Among the commoners, there were young men who took the lead and rushed towards the wizard. They protected him tightly, and did not let anyone touch him. Since the sorcerer could not be captured, Siko glared at Busi, waiting for an explanation. At this time, Bushi felt like he was suffering in silence, unable to express his bitterness. But after all, he was still a smart person. He quickly reacted and begged Shikai for mercy. "Great Khan, I don't have such thoughts. Right now, only a few people in the army listen to me." Many of the people from the White Russian tribe who came here originally did not believe in wizards, but now they could not help but believe in the truth. The rumbling sound was, of course, not thunder rolling. Couldn't you see that the sky was still incomparably blue? This sound was made by the cannons of the 5-star army. Under the coordination of the cannons from the outside and the inside, the timing of the attack was accurate, resulting in the greatest effect. At this moment, the sound of the cannons continued. The east gate of the Great Raven City had been completely blown open. Under the gate, countless armored new Second Army cavalry rushed into the city. The wizard stood among the crowd, enjoying the worship of the crowd. However, he was still in a daze. He only said these words because his family was controlled by Wang Guang. For their safety, he had no choice but to say these words. Even before this, he was already prepared to be despised by the crowd. This was because he did not believe that the everlasting heaven would send down any lightning punishment. If even he did not believe it, how could he convince others? He was even prepared to end his career. With his death, he could ensure the safety of his family, so it was worth it. He only hoped that the one called Wang Guang would do as he said. However, who would have thought that when he said those words according to Wang Guang's plan, there would actually be a lightning punishment? Could it be that Wang Guang was the one who could communicate with the heavens? Not only was the wizard full of questions, but Ahu, who had been hiding in the crowd, was also dumbfounded. He also had a face full of doubts. What was going on? Was this Magus really that powerful? If he had known this earlier, he would have treated him as an important guest. Then there would not be so many worries in the Great Raven City. "It's your turn." Among the crowd, the calmest was Wang Guang and a group of secret agents. They had already known what was going to happen and had calculated everything. Now that everything was normal, he came to Ahuri's side and reminded him. "Oh, With this reminder, Ahu remembered that he still had a mission. With the help of a few secret agents, he squeezed through the crowd and walked up to the high platform. Everyone was still in a state of shock, so no one noticed the movements of the black-robed man. It was only when Ahuli walked up to the stage and appeared beside Shikai, that some of the bodyguards noticed. Someone shouted, "Who are you? Why aren't you backing down?" "Humph. You're just someone who has been abandoned by the heavens. What's there to be proud of?" Ahu, who had once led 20,000 soldiers, would not be frightened by the shouts of a few soldiers. After a cold snort, he took off his black robe and revealed his original appearance. Ah! It's the Great Khan. The bodyguards had all seen Ahuli before. After recognizing his identity, they still greeted him as they used to. "That's right, it's this Khan," Ahu replied in a deep voice. He suddenly turned to look at the commoners in the square and shouted, "I'm Ahu. I didn't die. This Khan has returned." "Ah, it's the Great Khan." Someone among the commoners took the lead and shouted, then knelt on the ground. With this leader, the other commoners also knelt on the ground out of habit. From this, it could be seen that Ahu's efforts were not in vain. At least, he still had a lot of support among the commoners. Ahu's sudden appearance caused the commoners to kneel. At the same time, it also caused Cicero and Busi to feel fear. A person who was already dead in their eyes had suddenly appeared in front of them. How could they not be shocked, agitated, or even terrified? The commoners all knelt down, and many Mongol soldiers also knelt on the ground. They were all low-level soldiers and did not know about the struggle between the higher-ups. In their eyes, many people were still used to recognizing Ahu as the Great Khan. The situation suddenly went out of control, and Cicero's brows furrowed. At this moment, Ahuli opened his mouth. First, he pointed his finger at Cycle, then said in a clear voice, "This is a despicable person. This Khan saved his life and gave him a new lease of life, but he actually colluded with others to harm this Khan, forcing me to go into hiding due to my serious injuries. This person has committed a heinous crime." The shamans were right when they said that he was abandoned by the heavens. Ahu stood out and accused, causing the already chaotic square to become even more chaotic. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.